The Great Plains, the infinite tracts of land that extend all the way to the horizon. The Great Plains, which encompasses the major portion of American land and also extends into Canada. How did these Great Plains form? We understand that it was due to a deposit of sediment. We also understand that oceans left things, and then, of course, the glacier explanation. But beyond the understanding of what these great tracts of land really are and how they're connected today by the modern interstate system, we have to understand that there was wondrous accomplishments that occurred in the past in the Great Plains. The city of Omaha, which contains one of the best examples of what may be a genuine mudflood structure. We also have other examples within the city of Omaha. A regrading, another example of something that accompanies fires and destruction. Did this regrading actually happen? Hundreds of thousands of excavated tons of dirt. And a World's Fair, because why not? A couple, in fact. And in the nearby cities of Sioux City and Sioux Falls, we've had corn palaces. What's the story behind this? Why do we have so many high schools that look like castles? Join me today for Mud Flood Detective as we try to unravel these mysteries. In today's exploration, we're going to be exploring three cities that are more or less in alignment on the eastern edge of what constitutes the Great Plains, although you can see here on the Google Earth that it seems that the Great Plains extend further to the east. So where do they end, where do they begin, it's always a matter of debate. But these sites have a lot of interest, and we begin in the south with the city of Omaha, where we're going to be taking a look at St. Mary Magdalene Catholic Church, one of the examples of what may be a true mud-flooded structure, and something that has been changed over time because of all the so-called urban renewal. And you'll see as we look at the older images that this church is one of the few surviving structures from the original city of Omaha. And let's not forget that we had another regrading project. We'll also be taking a look at Central High School. Yeah, Central High School. Another one of those old schools that looks like a castle and has been renovated many times, and also looks like some sort of Greek or Roman temple. What a surprise. We'll be going on from Central High School to Sioux City and looking at a couple different sites in Iowa. Sioux City is rather intriguing because it's the confluence of a couple of rivers, namely the Missouri River, but also the Great Sioux River. And there's even a monument, in fact, one of the greatest monuments, to a veteran of the Lewis and Clark expedition, Sergeant Floyd. Yes, at one point in time, the United States military did build incredible monuments to non-commissioned officers. Quite fascinating. And then we'll be going and taking a look at a few sites in Sioux Falls, trying to ascertain if these sites or structures are actually mud flood structures. Is mud flood a legitimate theory, or is it just the product of our imagination? We start with Omaha, the premier city on the Great Plains in Nebraska, and also the initiation point of the Transcontinental Railroad, as shown here, at least coming from the east. Now, Omaha was founded in 1854. Keep in mind that virtually every other city within the Midwest, Des Moines, Sioux Falls, Sioux City, and many others, would rise in the same time that Omaha would. Yes, so much concurrent development. Is that intriguing? And here we have an early image of Omaha in the 1860s. Remember that where all these settlers came from. Well, these were all European immigrants who were pushing westward infinitely. What I always found fascinating was just how many things were assembled from nothing in a very short amount of time. Virtually the entire United States Midwest and the Great Plains was built and facilitated from 1850 to really 1900. And we've got quite a doozy when it comes to Omaha. Now, you can ascribe a lot of Omaha's prosperity to the Transcontinental Railroad. But here we have the stockyards that even rivaled the great stockyards in Chicago. And then this very impressive, I dare say, old world structure with very intricate architecture on it. Yes, the livestock building, because what else would you have without a livestock exchange? Sort of like in the South where you have cotton exchanges. And this early panoramic image of Omaha in the early 1900s. Now, keep in mind, we have to question the date that is attributed to every single photo and image that we have, because we don't know who actually kept the record or the archives. We think we do. And when Omaha wasn't even a city for 50 years, they had the Trans-Mississippi International Exposition. and it was to celebrate all the achievements within the lands west of the Mississippi, hence the name Trans-Mississippi. This was in 1898. But a lesser-known fact is that immediately following that exposition in Omaha, there was another exposition the following year in 1899, the Greater America Exposition. So I guess they just couldn't get enough expositions in Omaha. Now, what was this all about? Well, this is no different than all these other expositions or World's Fairs that we have elsewhere across the land, whether we're talking Buffalo, Chicago, or San Francisco. Here in the middle of the Great Plains, they managed to erect all of these very impressive structures and statues in a very short amount of time. They even go so far as to tell us that they preserved many of these structures and these edifices for use in the subsequent exposition. So, an exposition in 1898 and another one in 1899 in Omaha, Nebraska. And once again, you will see that these are very impressive structures that compare with the very impressive structures that we've seen in the Chicago World's Fair, the Buffalo World's Fair, the St. Louis World's Fair, the expositions in Paris, and everywhere else. Now, trying to document this is quite intriguing because we have all these structures, such as this very elaborate agriculture building, and you'll say, well, this is just a drawing. And that seems to be the way that this is recorded. Now we have to question that. Does that mean that this really happened, or was somebody just doing drawings, such as the Fine Arts and Liberal Arts building? Yes, back in the time when we respected the study and the concept of liberal arts. Now, if you don't have a STEM degree, you may as well hang it up and you're just going to college to waste time and waste money. At least that's what some people will tell you. I know what you're going to say. Yes, you were a history major and you taught history. And now it seems like everyone's interested in legitimate history everywhere. East end of the Great Court, and yes, Great Court. And the question you have to ask is this a legitimate image, or is this some sort of composite image, mixing actual photography and painting? Or is it really just a produced image? And I'm asking that question because it does tend to overlap. The Mines and Mining Building. What a very elaborate and gorgeous mines and mining building. Why don't we have mines and mining buildings all over cities today? Well, it's only something you would do for World's Fairs and expositions. Now, most of these sketch images that we have are attributed to the subsequent Greater America Exposition in 1899. But they do inform us that the same structures persisted through both expositions, the Trans-Mississippi in 1898 to this 1899 exposition. But which is which, I'm not really sure. The photos, though, are attributed to the Detroit Photographic Company, copyright 1898. Oh, that makes sense. The Horticulture Building. And you can see that all these buildings have elaborate architecture. They look like castles. And what's the explanation behind this? These were all temporary structures constructed with staff and stucco and balsa wood and popsicle sticks and whatever else just happened to be laying around out here on the Great Plains in 1898. We could build a gigantic triumph arch like we do for returning veterans and then tear it down just 2 years later because even though it looks very elaborate, it was just a temporary structure. And one of the biggest questions I have about all these claims of temporary structures, yes, here we have our bird's eye view of the Greater America Exposition, and you can see how extensive it was, is why can't we build temporary structures like this today? Why aren't we doing temporary structures like this today? Well, perhaps we'll get our promised World's Fair in Des Moines, Iowa, and we'll get to see. Maybe we'll have a colonial exhibits building such as this. Can you imagine how a title like that would go over today if anybody called a building a colonial exhibits building anywhere? Now, it stands to reason to question the actual existence of all these elaborate and amazing structures, such as the United States building. We have the length and the depth, but I guess the height really wasn't that important. Maybe we're just not supposed to know how tall this allegedly temporary structure was. And yes, I'm using that word very intentionally because did these structures exist? Well, we do have images that indicate that they did. Machinery Hall. And I wonder what was being exhibited in this incredible machinery hall. Were we seeing some of the machines that were going to be used in the subsequent grading project of Omaha? Yes, Omaha is another one of those cities where they did regrading. They moved entire hills and hundreds of thousands of tons of dirt, or so the historical account says. Now, whether you accept that or not is another matter. Maybe you do, and that's completely all right. And here we have the Manufacturers Building. Yes, all the usual names. And we even have a little pass here to get you into the particular exposition. And you know when it expires, and yet you have a number assigned to it. What an interesting picture, and what an interesting image. And what exactly does this show? Well, here we have a flyer for it. Omaha, USA, July 1st to November 1st, and they spell out the first, very classy. The Greater America Exposition. We're going to celebrate America. And wait a minute, what exactly is going on here in this illustration of this globe? Where's Canada? Why is Hawaii the size of a continent? Well, that's really strange. I guess that's the Northwest Passage after all. They maybe just cut it right through Canada or flooded Canada. There are some photographs that show us that these elaborate and incredible structures with all their unique names did exist. Again, if we take the photographs at face value, although it's very well known that every single one of these images that we have need to be questioned. Here we have this image after the second exposition in Omaha, Nebraska, where they tore down the structures from the Greater America Exposition. Or was it the Trans-Mississippi Exposition? I don't know. It's intriguing to think that there were two. And here we have this other early image of Omaha where it seems like everything is very overgrown and unkept. And yet in the distance you can see that there are plenty of elaborate structures that were established or built at some point in time. Here we have a postcard of the City Hall and the County Courthouse. Now, keep these in mind because this is not the current City Hall nor the current County Courthouse, but they are going to go through this interesting regrading project in Omaha, which is very well documented with many photographs, which I find quite fascinating. Yes, these were the structures we could build in the 1800s, again, out in the middle of the Great Plains. And in some of these images, you'll see the efforts that we have to regrade the terrain. As we understand it, they wanted to remove the hills, very similar to the story that we have in Kansas City and Seattle, and even Bashton, where we could actually easily regrade terrain. Of course, remember when they did it in Boston, they didn't have any kind of heavy machinery. Now, they tell us that they regraded Omaha at various points in times from 1890 through the 1920s. But it always seems to be a bit of a hand wave. When exactly is this image from? Because a lot of these images, even from the Nebraska Historical Society, are a little undated, or they have a circa date assigned to them. Is this from the early 1900s? Is this from the 19-teens, the 1920s? What kind of machinery are they using? Well, in the images, we tend to see some very rudimentary steam-driven excavators, as we understand it. And if these machines were so effective, and they really were this capable of moving this many tons of dirt in a short amount of time, why did we ever go away from this? And yet, when you look closely at some of the old structures, many of which no longer exist in Omaha, you still get the impression of, how shall I say, slant construction. Now, is that what's really going on? Or is there something more behind these images? Why do we have this very fine and smooth grade here behind this structure, or in the ground below it, that's been removed? How exactly did they achieve that? It's very impressive. Why does it look like it's on a concrete slab? Or this particular image here of this house that seems to be teetering on the brink of collapse, or just simply tipping over this hill that was apparently created by this regrading project. And you really have to ask yourself, how exactly did they go about doing this regrading project? How much did this cost? Houses needed to be lowered. Some municipal buildings were left up on hills, such as the county courthouse most famously. Yes, they just left the county courthouse up on a hill and built stairs up to it. Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of the regrading project? You look in more depth in some of the Nebraska Historical State Archives, and you'll find other interesting images that apparently show you how they lowered these houses with the grading. Although what you'll notice is you'll never actually see any lowering of the houses, you'll only have it implied in the images. Now, we can certainly assume that everything went off easily as we're informed, but how exactly did they go about doing this? I mean, why aren't we regrading cities to this day? And here we have our first look at St. Mary Magdalene, the Catholic Church. And this is one of the most definitive examples of what may potentially be a mud flood structure. Or maybe it's not. I suppose it depends on your perspective. But here we have it, just infinite amounts of dirt that are being removed. And yet nearby we have very elaborate structures that are certainly not made out of cheap wood. I don't know if there's any issues with this particular image. It's rather intriguing. Many people would just simply take this image at face value and accept it as definitive evidence of the regrading project going off according to plan. And maybe that's how they did it. Not exactly sure. I also know, though, that there is a photograph of my grandfather's family from the 19 teens where the last member of the family was superimposed in the image. And so in the middle of the family picture, there's a floating baby. So could babies float in the 19 teens, or was it just an example of image manipulation from the 19 teens? Now, St. Mary Magdalene here was constructed originally in 1903, and then according to the historical information, it was regraded in the 1920s, and then they built the bottom portion of the church. That's right. The official historical account tells us they built the church from top to bottom. Now, engineering projects do state it's possible to do that, but it's very difficult. Did they really build these lower floors here on this church after removing the dirt? And if they did that, how exactly did they go about doing that? Now, this image here gives you that clue. That's what happened. Although, what about this building next to the church that, of course, no longer exists? Did they do the same thing with this particular structure? Or was that lower section of the building already in existence? Was the lower section of the church already in existence? And you can see why you have one of the most definitive cases to give evidence that there was, in fact, a mud flood. Or if not that, then indications that perhaps everything that we're being told here about this particular church and all these other structures in Omaha might be subject to a little bit more scrutiny. Because how is it we could achieve something like this with these impressive regrading projects? How was it we were able to settle all of these cities in this large, expansive geographical area in such a short amount of time? Now, you can go and visit this church today and come to your own conclusions about whether you think the materials are different from the portion constructed in 1903 and the portion constructed after 1920, whenever they actually did the regrading project. But I'm still trying to figure out how one would have gone about constructing the lower levels if it did happen, as we're informed it did, according to the official historical account. How would you do that? Do you remove a little section of dirt underneath the upper floors and then slowly build in the entire foundation? Is that practicable? Is there really any difference between the blocks and the bricks from the upper portion of the church and the lower portion of the church? Now, I have this tab for an on-site investigation because I intend to take a closer look. But some of these other images do give the inclination that, yes, they did indeed clear the dirt. But did they, or could we just simply not see the lower portions of the structures? Or is there something else going on with the images? Why do we have so many people just standing around here while this very intense excavation is going on? Now, according to historical excerpts, the population that was living in Omaha during this time was quite disrupted by the fact that the excavation was going on all through the night. But I have to ask myself, I thought everybody was basically working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how could you have people in Omaha who weren't actually working and trying to sleep through the night? I'm being a little facetious, but it's one of those questions that's worthwhile to ask. And what exactly is going on with these stairs here? Now, again, the official historical account tells us that the upper portion of the church was converted into a balcony. But what exactly is holding up these stairs? Well, the dirt that it's resting on, of course, I suppose, again, if you take this image at face value. But how does this really make any sense with the structural support of this building? And again, taking this historical account at face value, this is the early 1900s. This is after the time when we could very easily build churches anywhere, even small unincorporated communities, such as that very impressive church in Petersburg, Iowa, a town that's never had more than 70 people. So if they could throw up a church there, made out of very impressive stone in a very small amount of time, why not do it in Omaha? Wouldn't it have been more cost-effective than trying to do this very incredible, stellar engineering achievement of somehow being able to construct a structure top to bottom and fill in the lower floors later after removing the dirt? Or in effect, while removing the dirt? Does that really make any sense? I'm sure a lot of people will simply accept it at face value and just say, well, there's pictures, they must have done it. Why would anybody lie? What would anybody have to gain from lying? Or if you don't believe people are lying, then perhaps you believe that people have been misinformed. But who's really been misinformed? Well, certainly not these individuals. They were very carefully supervising this project. So I guess you could say this was after unionization and you had to have supervisors assigned. But you see these images, and again, you have different outcomes that seem to be displayed within these images. Was the lower portion of the structure already in existence and it simply had to be dug out as part of this regrading? Is that really what was going on here? Was this a regrading, or was this just simply a cleanup, a salvage project, removing the dirt from the lower portions of the structures that were already present? And there's many examples of structures that we do have very extensive foundations and basements that are discovered. For example, my grandfather's farm. Now, looking at the Douglas County Courthouse here in Omaha, this was the structure that they left up on a hill, again according to the regrading. So again, what exactly is the point of regrading if you're going to leave the county courthouse up on a hill? Now, another interesting account is that they constructed the new county courthouse on the other side as part of an addition to the existing county courthouse. And now there's multiple examples of this occurring, and it seems as though in the new county courthouse we lost a very impressive dome, or maybe it was never there to begin with, but on the early postcards it shows the new Douglas County Courthouse in Omaha as having a dome, but the current one is domeless. So I don't know, maybe it was just out of the budget, or maybe the dome was removed at some point in time. I know we could look at the historical account and see what's written about it, but it's rather interesting that we have multiple different depictions of different outcomes of structures. Now, the current county courthouse is certainly a very impressive structure. But what's really the story behind Omaha? Is this one of the ultimate examples of an entire city that was salvaged and has been altered, changed, and renovated over time? Now, we're not doing a full city exploration of Omaha at this time. We're simply looking at some choice examples and just considering the account that we have of this regrading project, these multiple expositions, all within a city that wasn't even close to being 100 years old yet, and that's even from its initial founding date. And yet somehow they managed to pull all this off. They managed to build this entire city from scratch after 1854, establish a transcontinental railroad, build all these impressive structures out of brick and block, then do a regrading project, and while they were at it, they also managed to fill in lower levels of buildings, most notably St. Mary Magdalene Church, but if it was that easy to do, then it's suffice to say that they did it on other structures, did they not? They were able to construct additions to the existing courthouse and then tear down a courthouse. So it's very, very incredible. In fact, the city hall was actually called the Red Castle. How did we ever get away from constructing our city halls as castles? I'm not even going to show you the current Omaha City Hall because, it's your classic brutalist architecture building that's completely nondescript and has no details. And yes, I'm using fancy words. Now, the nearby Central High School, which is relatively close to Mary Magdalene Church, is quite impressive in and of itself. And it's gone through many different iterations. Yes, a high school with a smokestack and very impressive pediment on it. And you can see how quickly they retrograde, or the grading project completed on it, and then they established grounds around it. They even have a more recent addition that seems to be built in the hill. So I thought they were regrading everything and leveling it off, but maybe they didn't do it on the school. Yes, look at this pediment here. Nothing says Omaha, Nebraska, and United States 1800s, 1900s aside from these images that seem to display the pantheon of Greek and Roman deities. And let's not forget our favorite seashell. There's even an Orpheum Theater in Omaha that's very elaborate on the interior. So yes, in the Midwest, they don't have Fox theaters, they have Orpheum theaters. In fact, you go to many different towns and you'll find that the theater is called the Orpheum. It's a name that's used a lot. And in nearby Lincoln, Nebraska, we also have the very impressive and very tall Nebraska State Capitol that was completed in the 1920s. Again, supplanting many previous Nebraska capitals and not leaving the territorial capital in Omaha. So we go from Omaha, north on the Missouri River, to Sioux City in Iowa. Now, Sioux City has a rather intriguing history to it as well, and we have this with the Sioux City founders. Coincidentally, Sioux City, Iowa was founded in 1854, the exact same year that Omaha was founded, and close to the year that Des Moines was actually, how shall we say, revived as a city, and then just a few years later would become the capital of Iowa. And we can see here they have the C. Montgomery Burns slant construction technique mastered here for Sioux City. So it all makes sense because, again, it was all founded in the same year as Omaha. So, yes, multiple cities in a nearby area. And let's not forget that Sioux City, Iowa is famous for the very incredible corn palaces that included turrets and very elaborate towers, and let's not forget that impressive dome, a frame that was filled in by corn. At least that's, again, what the official history tells us. Why aren't we doing corn palaces like this currently? I mean, imagine seeing a corn palace like this all the time. Of course, longtime viewers of the channel may recall that in the past they've done all sorts of things in Iowa, not just corn palaces. They even did a bluegrass palace in Iowa. Yeah, bluegrass, which is what Kentucky is known for. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. We've looked at the Pierce House or the Pierce Mansion here before, again made out of this impressive red stone, so maybe you could call this a red castle too. Imagine having this as your house. So, redstone castle houses and corn palaces in Sioux City. Again, all these cities growing at the exact same time from the 1850s to the early 1900s. The things that we could accomplish in such a short amount of time. Oh, and why not have a castle high school in Sioux City too? That may as well look like it's constructed out of the same blocks. If we have such an abundance of these redstone blocks, then why are we still not constructing structures out of them? And this particular high school is on a hill as well, because why not? Did they do regrading in Sioux City as well? There's no reason to doubt that because it seems like it was a very easy and cost-effective method to do, even though we're informed currently that these are still the most stunning engineering achievements for these cities in their entire history. To say nothing of that retaining wall over in Dubuque, Iowa, which again has a very questionable history behind it. And it wouldn't be a city unless you had a very elaborate train station here from Chicago Northwest in Sioux City. And look at this, a safe city to invest in. Earliest settlement to January 1892. And I'm merely showing this because this is the example of the early town, city, and county records that we had. Ah yes, just a very simply binded book. And recall there were all sorts of issues with the paper that were used in the 1800s because it wasn't acid-free. And so therefore a lot of archives officially were lost. I like the tower on this particular train station with the portal window. Now, what was really going on at these corn palaces? They were just bored and they decided to do corn palaces all the time. It wasn't challenging enough to build a city out of nothing with elaborate city halls and county courthouses and, of course, the train stations. Oh, yes, and they also had a very impressive stock exchange that, again, kind of looks like a castle in Sioux City because why wouldn't you have something like that? So it's not just breweries that were built like this. It was also livestock exchanges. You know, if you were down south, it would be the cotton exchange, I suppose. But this is the Midwest of the United States. Everything's about livestock here. And why not have one of these very impressive railroad roundhouses that just looks like it's a mega colossal structure? Now, again, looking at some of these earlier images of this high school, and again, you see exactly what it is. It's a castle. What was really the purpose for constructing like this at any point in time? How do you defend this being a castle structure from the mainstream historical account? This is just supposed to be a school. Were we expecting our school to come under siege? I mean, yes, the official history tells us that there were many Native American tribes that were still in the area that were considered hostile. So was it a last-ditch defense plan? Was there concern that there were going to be raiders coming up who were still sympathetic to the old Confederate States of America? There's really no explanation behind it. There's no explanation for why we have corn palaces with elaborate towers such as this. Or the early impressive City Hall in Sioux City, Iowa, with a very unique tower and a very little dome on top with an intriguing spire. Why did they ever want to go away from this? Well, we'll be told that it was condemned over a period of time. So it was replaced with this newer City Hall. And then they even go so far as to tell us that in the 1990s, they really rebuilt this City Hall by utilizing the old stones. Yes, they actually say they pulled that off. Now, we have the county courthouse here in Sioux City, Iowa, and this is very interesting. Now, on the outside, this is another one of these structures that doesn't look so impressive. Now, the official history tells us that this county courthouse was built 1916 to 1918, so during World War I, when the United States was involved in World War I. And keep in mind that was a total war concept for the United States. How exactly did the symbols on this courthouse, the Woodbury County Courthouse, remind us of the United States, or Iowa for that fact. And it seems as though some of the images give us the impression that it might just be a little bit older, but maybe that's just something that we get. I'm always intrigued when we take a close look at a lot of this, because we see these images in multiple locations. What exactly did they represent? Was this just simply the terracotta imagery that everybody used? Were these prefabricated constructions for when you decided to build your unique courthouse? And here we have the Board of Supervisors and the architect. Who were the contractors? Well, we don't really need to know who the contractors were. We just have two general contractors listed. We can just assume that there were artisans and craftsmen all over the place that you could just pull off the street. And they were the ones who fashioned these very incredible and human-like figures that we still see in the courthouse to this day. And it's very similar to the hotel that we looked at in Los Angeles, where the structure itself from a distance looks rather bland. But when you look closely at it, you see all the impressive, intricate detail. Was this really done by our people in Sioux City, Iowa in 1916 and 1918? We even have an earlier courthouse in Sioux City, which is very impressive in and of itself. Now you might be asking, well, if this was the earlier courthouse and then it was replaced, it was certainly in the same location. Was it in the same location? It's always intriguing when you look at this and you have this account. Now, some historical accounts say they're in the same location. Other accounts say they're in different locations. So why move? Why even ever replace this courthouse? Well, there's a variety of reasons. It was structurally unsound. It was slowly falling apart. So here we've got this new one that we did. And we constructed it in 1916 and 1918 to endure. And we also decorated it quite extensively. And while we're at it, we're able to establish geometric precision in the construction. Again, the interior painting is rather interesting, or the mural, or whatever you want to call it. Again, how exactly does this represent the people of Iowa in 1916 and 1918? Were the people of Iowa wearing togas and parading around in an idyllic situation? Is that really what we're missing here? I mean, we've seen plenty of images and even video footage of World War I and all the recruits going there. But this doesn't look like these are the people, especially from Iowa in World War I. What's with this particular figure here? Is this the great god of Iowa, Atlas, with his 12-pack abs? Is this representing something else? Is this supposed to be the one true god? What's with all these figures by this figure? And why is this on a county courthouse? What exactly is this truly representing? Now, I'm just throwing out questions and considerations because why would anybody put this on a county courthouse today or in 1916 and 1918? Yes, I know. We want to convey the concept of governmental authority at the county level. And what better way to do it than to put all of the Mr. Burns dressed up as God figures in statues on the courthouse? And again, how would you have the money and the time or the inclination to do that? And as we understand it, was the United States not focused on World War I? There's all the questions we always have about economic capability, but, the United States can easily go through a Great Depression. Remember the first Great Depression in the 1870s, and remember all the panics that came after that. And remember all the incredible achievements the United States had before the establishment of the Federal Reserve. What an incredible eagle they have on this county courthouse. Now, I will say this, at least an eagle is associated with the symbolism of both the United States and Iowa. There is an eagle on the Iowa flag, although I have to say this eagle that we see that's on this courthouse is much more impressive than any eagle on any flag. I would even go so far as to say that any sort of figure like this on a building is more impressive than a flag in general, but that's just my opinion. Maybe you've got a thing for flags and flags make sense to you. But how can we really justify this courthouse? And you can see next to it is the tower from the City Hall that was apparently renovated and reconstructed in the 1990s, utilizing the original stone. And another question I have is, what exactly is the construction material? Are these just standard bricks? What are the blocks that make up these impressive sculpted figures? How exactly did they do this? Were these prefabricated? Was this face prefabricated somewhere and just sitting around in some shop, maybe in Chicago or New York, and then it was brought out by train and then lifted perfectly into place? Is that how they did things in 1916 and 1918? And if they did have that capability then, why are we still not doing this now? I know there'll be the usual litany of answers about, well, we just don't have the desire to do this. We don't have the money, which is hilarious because we can always raise the debt ceiling, so how can we not have money now? But whatever, we'll accept that. Or, well, we don't have artisans and craftsmen, all these immigrants coming from Europe that are just experts. Yes, this is the dome that's inside the Woodbury County Courthouse. You don't actually see it from the outside because it's a dome within the structure, and yet it's that impressive. And here's an example of a black and white photograph allowing you to see some of the intricacy within the interior of the Woodbury County Courthouse in Sioux City, Iowa. So why do we not construct structures like this today? Why don't we put all this elaborate decoration on the walls, on the ceiling, on the columns? Is that an owl figure I see over there? Or is that just my mind playing tricks on me? I'm not really sure. What does all this symbolism really represent? Well, it's just decoration. And here is Sioux City's Orpheum Theater, because why not have another Orpheum Theater over in Sioux City, Iowa? I mean, it was founded in the exact same year as Omaha, so maybe that was the year they were earmarking Orpheum Theaters. Look, it's not built yet. Oh, look at that. I see our favorite cartouche up there. Yes, right above the main theater itself. Because why not? A very impressive theater that needs to be very elaborately decorated on the inside. And near Sioux City, we have the Floyd Monument, named after Sergeant Floyd, a non-commissioned officer, who has a very elaborate obelisk monument that's dedicated to him. Now, we've looked at this before in previous explorations, and here are some wide image shots to give you an idea about it. Now, it may not seem that impressive, especially when compared to the Washington Monument, but it was constructed in 1900 to 1901 by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it commemorates the Lewis and Clark expedition. And here we see an image of William Clark. We don't have any photographs because both Lewis and Clark passed away before photography, but we do have many elaborate painted images of them. Why does William Clark remind me of many actors once again? I don't know, maybe it's just my imagination. The eyes look so lifelike in this particular painting. And they always had such elaborate hairdos too from that time frame. But it's funny to me how nobody really looks into the biographies of William Clark and Meriwether Lewis. It's quite intriguing. Everybody always refers to it as the Lewis and Clark expedition to the Pacific, and it was when the two adventurers went off leading their expedition of many soldiers and explorers to chart this path through the New Louisiana Purchase and understand what was there. Ah yes, another one of our scaffolding construction images that gives us the impression that the obelisk was complete. And here you can actually see the route of the Lewis and Clark expedition. How fortuitous that the Louisiana Purchase just happens to match the area that we designate as the Great Plains. And then it goes all the way out to where we have Seattle. Here is Sergeant Floyd, and he bears a striking resemblance to many an actor to this day. Very interesting look to him. And apparently he passed away of an appendicitis, at least that's what the official history says, near Sioux City. And it's also interesting to note that this particular obelisk is considered the first U.S. National Historical Monument. How fascinating. Again, something else noteworthy about Iowa. And here you have this interesting little plaque that seems a little bit more ornate, designated the gravesite of Sergeant Floyd. The Floyd Memorial Association, aided by the United States and the state of Iowa, different entities. And of course you have the information marker that tells you exactly how Sergeant Floyd died on the Lewis and Clark expedition. And they knew exactly where they buried him. That's quite a designation for a non-commissioned officer. I mean, how many non-commissioned officers passed away in the Civil War and they didn't get an entire obelisk constructed to them? And I just find that intriguing because if you step back and look at this, this is the most opulent monument that's dedicated to the Lewis and Clark expedition. And even on the early maps, isn't it amazing how straight and perfect that old route is? Because this was a map that was drawn by Lewis and Clark apparently. And there you see it, Floyd's grave. They had Floyd's grave marked there. Now look, I'm all about giving respect to the dead, but they really seem to go the extra mile for this Sergeant Floyd. And when you compare this obelisk to other monuments across the United States that are commemorating the Lewis and Clark expedition, none of them come close to comparing to this impressive obelisk in Sioux City, Iowa. So what's really going on? Meriwether Lewis is a rather interesting character in and of himself, and when you actually look at the history of both Lewis and Clark, you'll see that they have rather unique biographies. One even serving in the Legion of the United States, what they originally called the United States Army, when they were having trouble in what was called the Northwest Indian War. And the Legion of the United States was the formation created by General Mad Anthony Wayne. That was the original regular United States Army. Meriwether Lewis has a very interesting family coat of arms. A dragon on the top, and in the coat of arms it's a dragon with a bloody hand in its mouth. Boy, just when I thought I'd seen all the most interesting family coats of arms, well, when you've got the Lewis coat of arms, you've got a dragon eating a hand. But remember, the most impressive monument for the Lewis and Clark expedition, dedicated to the memorial of Sergeant Floyd. So, I guess if you're on a exploration expedition and you're a non-commissioned officer, you're going to get the very best monument. This is apparently a biography that was written by Thomas Jefferson for Lewis and Clark. But, it's really hard to say, is this Jefferson's original writing or is this a copy of it? Because remember, documents from the 1800s didn't really survive. What's really the story behind William Clark? What's within the background of these individuals? Why do they seem like they have almost a legendary or mythical status? We understand them to be historical, real figures. And up in Sioux Falls in South Dakota, where we also have examples of this impressive stone that just seem to be abundant across the Great Plains. Sandstone, limestone, redstone, all the unique names that we have for it. As though they're just quarries all over the place that are readily available with this unique stone, and we could build structures that were our city halls, our county courthouses. What do you think's going on? Was there a mud flood? Thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Restitutor Orbis channel for another live stream edition. And after a brief hiatus, we are back with Mud Flood Best Evidence. And let me extend a welcome to all viewers, all Prime Explorers, and all others joining us. What are we really going to do? We're going to examine what a mud flood is, and we're going to look at some of the best evidence that we have. We're also going to examine some of that evidence and try to determine exactly what it is that it's telling us. But to address the elephant in the room, what exactly is a mud flood? And that's where we're going to start, because there are a few different definitions. And is there an official definition? We also have to remember that we're looking at things that many others would label or categorize as pseudo-history or pseudo-science. So we're just going to look at things objectively and come to our own conclusions, basically, again, doing the things that we're not supposed to do. Now, for frequent viewers of the channel, you probably know what particular structure that we're looking at here, don't you? Once again, we're back to building number one in our explorations, the Iowa State Capitol, which is always our baseline building. Now, this is the western look. In other words, the camera is set up to the west of it, and we're looking to the east, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And it's really good to see everybody, and I'm glad everybody's showing up for this exploration, because really, mud flood is one of the core concepts of old world theory. However, whether you subscribe to the theory or not, or you have other theories, it is something that's very interesting and needs to be explored, because there are a lot of images and there are a lot of records. I'm going to use that term from here on out. I'm not going to say the official historical account or anything like that, because guess what? The official historical account changes day by day, because, we have historical revision. So according to the record of the Iowa State Capitol, this is one of the early construction photos. We don't have an exact date on it. Going off of the step-by-step construction process, this is early 1880s, before they've finished the dome. And you may recall that when we did our little exploration on our little diamond or regional area in the Midwest of the United States, with the capitals of Iowa in Des Moines, Minnesota in St. Paul, Wisconsin in Madison, and then, of course, Illinois in Springfield, not Chicago. And within that particular area, it seemed as though there seemed to be some sort of exception from the effects of the last reset. Again, the theory that a reset occurred circa 1800 to 1850, if you go by the current dating system, and you know that we question that as well. But what's interesting looking at this state capital is it looks like it's been subjected to some very terrific forces. And remember, this is all brand spanking new at this point, but yet we see foliage, trees that are growing. But we have this little shack right here on the base. And then, of course, because it's on a hill, as many of these structures tend to be, a very prominent hill, we also see that there's other houses and dirt and ground leading right up to it. Now, you may recall in our previous explorations of the Iowa State Capitol, it has a very extensive underground and tunnel system. And in fact, there are images that indicate that state records are stored there. Now, what's actually in those records is up for anybody's guess. They also have a very great library. Now, of course, if you've seen the interior of the Iowa State Capitol, you know that these images do seem to be, well, quite a contradiction from what you'd expect to see, because they're formal images that show you a palace. The exterior is a palace. The interior is very definitely a palace, but it's a state capitol, the only 5-dome state capitol in the United States. But you look at this other image, which is oddly enough from the same time frame and shows the dome being completed. Now, about the only change you really see is that the little shack here has been removed. So I don't know, perhaps the dome builders or the contractors actually lived in that little shack that we saw. But other than that, it looks pretty much the same. Even the same scaffolding. What exactly were they doing with that scaffolding? Who knows? And why am I suggesting that the Iowa State Capitol itself may be a mud flood building? Well, I don't know. And you'll often hear the terms mud flooder. And what's mud flooder mean? It simply means a building that's been subjected to the mud flood. Now, I know you're saying, get to the point. What exactly is a mud flood? I'm working to it, so just stay with me. But you're suggesting that in this mud flood, or this sudden change of mud that's overflowed around this building, that it's what's caused this unique condition that we see. Now, you can accept the records that we have that this building really was constructed by the good people of Iowa in the United States circa 1871 to 1886. And maybe you even believe that the architect himself actually placed all those beautiful column statues and every brick and even every little block of gold. Yes, the Capitol Dome is covered in gold, and they even have the temerity to tell us that it's cheaper to cover it in gold than to paint it gold. That's what they say. But yet, there's something that really stands out about it. And looking at these early images, see, here's a little shack where I guess the dome building contractors lived. I'm just going to say that. And then here in the second image, the little shack's gone. But aside from the addition of the dome itself, it looks a lot the same. Now, of course, you always have to ask questions about these images. Are these images legitimate historical images from the time frame they're attributed to? Have they been in some way modified? Were they intentionally modified, or were they unintentionally modified? We already have all these questions, and we're just looking at one single building. And of course, I relate it back to the Iowa State Capitol because that is our building number one. That is the building that we compare all of the buildings. This was a structure that, according to official records in the United States, in the great state of Iowa, which, by the way, is known for its agrarian practices. It is the Corn Belt. It is the middle of the Corn Belt. It has the best soil in the Union. But it's not exactly a harbinger of gold or other precious materials, and yet somehow they're the only state that built a 5-dome state capitol. Again, going off of official records. But there's also something else when you look at the numerous renovations of the Iowa State Capitol. You'll see that it reveals the foundation. And that's where things get very interesting because we see how deep underground it goes. Now, you may recall our on-site explorations. We know that it has a lower level. In fact, the main entrance actually takes you right into the lower level where you go into security, and then you are free to explore this incredible palace. And I strongly suggest if you're in Iowa that you do so. It's free and it's quite enjoyable. It's also always comfortable on the inside in this massive structure because they seem to have a perfect HVAC system, whether you go winter or summer. And so that's just setting the stage for what we have here. We're looking at this. Oh, here we go. I love this. And that's why you're actually saying something like this, isn't it? And, I just thought I would highlight this because why do you even have to say anything like this? Oh, let's just roll with insults. Hilarious. Anyways, when you look at the actual foundation here of this particular structure, you can see the same thing. And you can see two workers right here where you have these original blocks as part of the foundation. Now you'll look at the original construction of this structure and you'll see that they just show a couple horse teams and some people that are actually planning it and constructing it. And there's always scaffolding around it. In fact, they even tell us that in 1873 they had to replace the original foundation stone because the 1871 foundation stone cracked. So yes, a series of stories that all come around that. Oh, brother. Ah, someone's really trying to disrupt me. I can't imagine why. Well, that's okay, because that tells me that I'm on the right track. So, no worries about it. You can keep trying. You've tried so hard and you've never been able to do it. And I guess that just really irritates you. Anyways, looking at the foundation stones, this is exactly what we see with many of these other structures. And we'll look at the other famous example. But it gives you the indication that there's a lot more to them, that they were built in a much more elaborate way, and there's a lot of mystery that goes deep in the ground. Unless, again, you really want to believe, and remember, they're doing this renovation with modern equipment that was not available in the 1870s, again, according to official records. But here you see it. You got your little digger and your two guys just sitting around. So I guess that kind of reflects what we'd expect to see from the construction photos in the 1870s. But it's a recurring tale with all of these structures that are deemed mud flood structures or irrigation. So that starts with the Iowa State Capitol. Now, there's something to be aware of. Because of the is a, how shall we say, very, very controversial theory, or maybe it's not, or maybe it's just something that's hard to ignore, it should be noted that there are a lot of images that may have been intentionally modified. Because as usual, whenever we have something that there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of background on it, we have to obfuscate the word for some reason. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's any official authorities behind this. I would never suggest any such thing, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who just simply have to do with their time out there that decide to put together photos. Now, what they want to do, are these photos real? Are they not real? Is it just something to try to look stupid? Because the answer always is, instead of just asking questions and genuinely exploring something, you call people point your finger in their face and say they're stupid. And that's how you're going to try to discredit them. And it's a very, very old tactic, and it's very predictable. Much like when you try to group people into certain groups and also play according to that mentality. That's very predictable as well. But whether these images are authentic or not, we are looking at images such as the construction images of the Iowa State Capitol. We'll be looking at images of 3 cities that all conducted regrading in the United States. And we take the United States because of the fact that it has a very compressed timeline. So there's all these incredible achievements in the United States in the 1800s. But every time you see an image like this, all I'm suggesting is that you simply be cautious, that you question it. Is this a legitimate historical image, or is this an image that's been altered in some way, shape, or form? And no, the alteration of images is not a new technology that just came about in the 2020s with the advent of what we call artificial intelligence. Granted, in the 20th century, I always thought of artificial intelligence as having sentience and self-awareness, and what they call artificial intelligence does not have anything of the sort today. But it can produce wonderful pictures, it can produce video, and we shouldn't be asking questions about it, naturally. But you should question images like this because they may be authentic, they may not be authentic. But there's a lot more to this account than we like to believe. Hey, Dallas, good to see you. Yeah, and ultimately it's up to you to decide how to evaluate these images. Because here's the reality, even the legitimate construction images from the official archive, in other words, the State Archive of Iowa that documents the construction of the Iowa State Capitol, I can't tell you for sure if those images have been altered. I can't tell you for sure when those images were taken, and nobody else can either. Yes, if you trust the records, if you trust what's been written down, and you don't question it, then sure, you can accept it. But that's why it's always important to look at these and really ask these kinds of questions, because no record is absolute. And you'll even see artwork such as this. Now, I know that this is produced by Stable Diffusion, one of the programs. We'll call it AI. We call everything AI now. But just to give you an idea of what a mud flood may look like. Now, what exactly is a mud flood? Well, ultimately, I'm going to answer that question, or at least the agreed upon consensus of what a mud flood is. You're talking about the liquefaction of the soil in a larger region, maybe even continent wide. That is how we're defining a mud flood. Now, what exactly is liquefaction? Well, in simple terms, the soil is turning to a liquid property and therefore it can no longer support the foundations of buildings. It is a scientific process that many in the mainstream do acknowledge. Liquefaction does happen. Now, granted, it's attributed to earthquakes and the effects and so on and so forth, but it is a very well documented event that has occurred. And we'll look at some official images of it and not stable diffusion. But the mud flood and the images that we have that indicate that there was a mud flood, and of course, I'm talking about the official historical images, that is what gives us the evidence that there's clearly been something very different in the past. Here's a good comment from Dallas. As a construction worker, I can firmly attest to the lack of safety precautions. Oh, even today? I thought everything was about safety, and that's why we can't do anything, Dallas. Or are you countering that? My goodness. So anyway, that's exactly what a mud flood is. Now, what you're looking at here is a disaster, a coal mining disaster in Aberfan, United Kingdom, 1966. And what had happened in this particular disaster, and yes, this is an official image, and this is a widely documented historical event. The coal topsoil that they piled up in top of a hill actually all collapsed, and you can see it utterly destroyed this particular neighborhood here. Now, why are we looking at these other examples? Well, the only reason I'm showing this is that there are other events that can occur where you have a massive collapse of soil that can create calamities such as this. Now, of course, this is a localized event. We're not saying that this is a mud flood, but what we are saying is that this is something that could resemble a mud flood. And so that's why it's important to always ask questions and try to look through all the details. We may not be able to get to the answers unless we're willing to make some assumptions, but we can get an idea of how things are. Now, there's no shortage of images from places such as California and really all over the land where you have mountainous terrain or uncertain terrain where you have what's known as landslides or mudslides. And again, this is very well documented and very well known. Nobody questions this. Nobody says that landslides are some kind of crazy conspiracy theory or anything like that. But once again, I'm simply showing an image of a well-known event that occurs where you have the destruction of homes, you have the destruction of land, you have the destruction of foundations, and it does happen. Now, once again, yes, you can say it's merely localized. It's not something to worry about. There's no way that it could happen for a larger region. How could it actually happen for a larger region? And by that, are we talking an entire nation state? Are we talking an entire continent? That's what we're trying to keep in mind, and that's what we're actually going to consider when we look at this evidence that we have of three main cities in the United States, but we're going to look way beyond that. So there's your landslide image. And then, of course, you have the classic defined mudslide, where just the terrain gives out because of an excessive amount of rain, and then you actually have the collapse of infrastructure here, destroying this little highway or county road. And so these are the examples that we have that show what really happens here. And once again, it looks like I've lost the ability to actually look at the comments. Well, that's not a surprise. Well, no worries. I'm just going to keep on going because I had a feeling there would be a lot of issues with this particular exploration. So no problem. Hey, Clara, looks like I'm back. Then cities may have slipped into the Atlantic. Yeah, that's definitely one. So looking at all these images and seeing these different events, and here's the great example that we know of, the temple in Salt Lake City. And with recent renovation efforts there, it's also shown that there are lower levels to the temple. And the explanation will be, well, of course it shows lower levels. It's just part of the foundation. Yes, we always have these very extensive foundations, yet when we look into the detail behind them and we look at some of the decoration, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for why we have such immense decorative detail on what's supposed to be underground and what was supposed to have been planned from the start of the construction of a structure as its foundation to be underground. That's where we run into one of those little inconsistencies and we have to question. By the way, for those of you not familiar with Salt Lake City, you got the tabernacle there on the other side. And the less said about the tabernacle in the movies Art Oz, the better. Now, does anybody know where this particular location is? This has been featured before by a couple other alternative researchers and other explorers. Mr. Something else. I saw the aftermath of a landslide. Yes, it is well documented. Yeah, I mean, whenever you have these events happening, they are terrifying because they can be very destructive and frightening. Sooner West has it, California. Oh, right on the money there, 50 wheel. Half Moon Bay in California. Yes. Half Moon Bay in California. Right off of the golf course, in fact, right below it. And what you're looking at here was a series of infrastructure ruins that are near the hotel. So, again, we have all the little indicators of this being, yeah, Dallas is right, near the golf course, near the hotel, in a very resort area. And, of course, not too far from the great land of San Francisco. And this infrastructure was unearthed because of the erosion of the soil. That's what the official account says. Now, what exactly were these pillars, these columns made of? When were they originally established there? Again, the official record, which, by the way, didn't really seem to come available until people asked questions about this, state that this was part of the infrastructure, an old dock that was built sometime in the distant past, late 1800s, early 1900s. No one's really sure. But you can find numerous images that give the indication that maybe this is something else. Maybe this is reflecting to some structure that was actually just completely covered by the ground. And what you have here is evidence, whenever it was built, it doesn't really matter, that this phenomenon can happen. That even if this historical record is absolutely correct, as it's relayed to us, that this was a structure constructed in Half Moon Bay, California, 1890s, early 1900s, that it does show that the ground can actually end up around these structures. That this is not just some kind of product of our fantasy or imaginations, that this does really happen. And so that's all I'm using this structure to establish, is that this phenomenon does really happen. And you can actually see that they've removed most of the ruins here currently. What it looked like in 2011, we actually have an individual here standing by one of these columns. I mean, that's what these look like to me, just giant columns. And then the few ruins that are left as they have been removed. So once this great and dramatic evidence of infrastructure put there by somebody, no, the official record tells us it was done by the city, the county, they did it, and it was all part of establishing a little bit of a beach area, and that's what they were doing. Okay, fine. And it just happened to end up in a hotel property. I believe it's a Ritz-Carlton, if memory serves, and it's right by a golf course. Yes, it's all just coincidence. But yet you look at some of the other evidence along with it, and you can see that there seems to be a little bit more of a complexity to it. It seems to be something a little bit more than just some dock or something that they were building, as the official record says. Now, is that an assumption? Yes. Could the official record be correct? Sure. But even if it is, like I said, the most dramatic detail about this is that it shows that this can really happen, that these structures can actually end up in the ground. Water the trees. The water level blows that dock explanation out of the water. Yes. Much like the water level blows the dock explanation out of the water in Star Trek Insurrection. Yeah. The less said about that, the better, I know. But yeah, good point there. You're absolutely right, too. But that's exactly how they try to explain it. Or maybe you could say the records aren't exactly accurate. But that's what we tend to go with. That's what we tend to have. And even more interesting is the images that we have that show the removal of these items, these columns, this infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, these ruins. I know I'm really going out on a limb by calling them ruins. You notice that it's done with modern equipment and nothing less than cranes. Now, if it took modern equipment and this level of effort to actually get this out of here, and how long did this really take? Not sure. How exactly was it constructed in the first place? Well, again, not questions that you're supposed to ask. And so that really gives us the overview of what is a mud flood. It's a hypothetical, a theoretical event that could have been region-wide, where we had the liquefaction of the soil that either led to the collapse of buildings or structures and the infrastructure of a previous civilization being in the mud or the soil, and then once it's solidified. Yeah, KC933 says it very well. Great example of liquefaction. And don't worry, we're going to look at some other ones, some other examples of liquefaction that are actually well documented. So that establishes exactly what the mud flood is. So let's take a look at some evidence that we have of this event that's occurred. Now, what we're going to be looking at is some of the examples from 3 great cities in the United States. And these 3 cities underwent some events where they actually said that they had to do what's called regrading. And we'll talk about that for each of these cities. Now, the first city that we're going to look at is one that we've explored before on the channel, the great city of Kansas City. Let me make sure I full image that for you. And I'm going to remove the banner just so you can see it a little bit easier. So the story goes with Kansas City, and you may remember we did an on-site exploration of Kansas City in the distant past. What they inform us is that the bluffs around the Missouri River, which is where Kansas City is situated, were so high that they had to level them. And what we have here are images of the leveling of these bluffs, that this took a lot of effort. Now, they go so far as to tell us, the official record, that this took about 50 years, from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. And so what means were they doing this? How were they leveling these hills, these ridgelines, these bluffs? This is a major earth-moving project. We didn't even have heavy machinery available. And it's kind of funny because a couple of weeks ago when we were looking in the history of railway and we were talking about steam-powered driven tractors, there's a lot of people who told me, well, steam tractors were not practical to run logistics with. Okay, fine. Then you can't tell me that steam tractors were practical to do all this. Are we to believe that all this earth moving was done with just simple horsepower, with just people with shovels and nothing better to do with their time? Now, yes, you may recall there's an interesting account with Kansas City. Oh, that's good, Leo. Doesn't look like they're hiding anything at all. No, they're all just standing there. You think they'd be constantly working and digging with their shovels, don't you? But that's exactly what they want to show us. They want us to think, oh, yes, there's a picture of it, so we have no reason to question it. I mean, is this even located in Kansas City? I don't know. The archive says that it is. But wherever it's located, it's very interesting, isn't it? And of course, you've got some pictures from down the road after they finished leveling Kansas City. And again, it's very interesting because you oftentimes see these roadways that are still covered with dirt. You see trolley tracks, and here we actually have a functioning trolley, and no, it's not being pulled by horses. And again, there's a lot of dust and dirt that remains on the ground. Now, again, are we just supposed to think that's horse poop? What exact time frame is this photo from? Early 1900s, don't have an exact year, which usually tends to be the case. But you always have this interesting plethora of details where you have the dirt-covered road, you have the trolley, here the operational trolley, and yet you have these very elaborately constructed buildings. You also have a very developed power system. Now, again, that's not necessarily questionable. The official record says power was developed and implemented in the 1890s, and everyone jumped on the bandwagon really quickly. Fine. But it is always intriguing to think about why we have this kind of aesthetic, if you will, with these cities. Oh, and by the way, I'm well aware that residents of Kansas City are all into the whole Tom Pendergast did everything explanation. And for those of you who don't know, Tom Pendergast was another one of those political bosses. He was in power 1925 to 1939. And about the only thing he was known for was running basically a political machine. So this was well before that political machine was in operation. And about the only thing you could attribute to that is all the beautiful Art Deco buildings that are in Kansas City. Although Tom Pendergast didn't invent Art Deco, and he wasn't an architect either. So just some interesting things to look at. But yes, you have images like this where here what looks to be a brick house is up on this bluff. And again, we have these very interesting individuals. Looks like John Malkovich and maybe Gary Sinise there with some top hats. And John Malkovich has the sunglasses on. And they're just standing there by that brick house. And maybe we've got Miles O'Brien, actor Cole Meany, up here on the roof, because remember, in my joke back when we explored Kansas City, Miles O'Brien was the person who did everything. He built all the houses. He did all this elaborate excavation. Now, how exactly do you really explain this? Why do you have this brick house up here on this bluff, and then you have this other structure here that's right next to this bluff? And believe me, this is a very common image that we see when we do these explorations, where we can't really explain this. And how exactly were they removing this dirt? Because remember, all of our commenters on the railroad exploration told us that steam-driven tractors were not practicable at that time. So again, doing it with horses, were they digging it? Or did they actually have the train that ran in there as they show in some other cities? And yes, we'll look at those examples. All good questions. And I'm not going to pretend that I don't, or I'm not going to pretend that I know, but it's just one of those interesting things. What's our real story? Very interesting brick pattern on the building. And that's something else that you see with a lot of these old world buildings too. that interesting brick pattern. Oh, there you go, Tabor. Dynamite. Tabor, I'm glad you said that because I got a comment on the St. Louis exploration about how they had to use dynamite to bring the buildings down with that St. Louis fire. You remember that one in the late 1840s? Problem was, dynamite wasn't invented, according to the official records, until the mid 1860s. So I don't know, maybe they had some kind of prototype dynamite. I don't know. It's just kind of funny to really think about that kind of stuff. Yeah, Dwayne says it really well here. Everything seems staged. That's the impression that it really gives you. Everything does seem staged. So let's get on the move on here. Gully Town, a grid of man-made canyons lead from the riverfront, late 1860s and early 1870s. So again, Kansas City. Yes. And so here we have a building, and this isn't one of these cheap wooden buildings we'd expect to see. Oh, no, it's a brick-built building. It's concrete of some sort, all in and amongst these gullies that we have, apparently running down to the river. And yet, oddly enough, it looks like there's some other remaining infrastructure here. Oh, it's just the riverbank. And maybe I'm just saying it looks that way. I'm not saying that it is, but it is very odd. It's very odd how these buildings are tucked right in here along these bluffs in this way. So they just decided to build the city here and not in a better area, which, by the way, if you go up and down the Missouri River, you could certainly find a little flatter area where you could lay out your city. But for whatever reason, and yes, we've been over it before in the explorations of Kansas City. But you'll see that with some of the development of the initial infrastructure with the bridges and everything else. And here you've got these series of structures. And no, this isn't the best photograph, but, I work with what I got and what I can find in the archives. And no, I do not alter images, and I do not even alter them to try to improve them. I show them to you exactly as I find them. So there might be better examples up there, but do I trust those better examples? Not necessarily, because there is a lot of alteration going on here. I'm merely confiding that I do not actively take part in alteration. Kitch, our Kansas City native, Gully Town. Yes, yes, yes. And again, we have these power lines, or what appears to be these power lines. What makes it very interesting. No people. Yeah, well, once in a while you'll see people, but it is very, very rare, isn't it? And then looking at an image such as this. Now, this is one I feel is very dramatic because here you can see what looks to be a brick or a stone building. Oh, look at that. They even have the nice decoration up by the roof. How nice. Tucked right in here next to this big, giant, what is this? A ridgeline? A pile of dirt? Where exactly did this come from? And then if you look over here, you have this other building. Again, not a wooden structure, tucked in next to this building right here. And what do we have here? A couple donkeys maybe just pulling a cart. Yes, that's how they're clearing it. We just needed one team of donkeys with a little bit of a plow. Now, I don't think there's any plow here, just like it's a couple donkeys with a cart. And they're just kind of roving around here. And then up on this ridgeline, we even have what looks to be a little bit of a rail so nobody falls off. Oh, yeah, that looks like it might be a terminal fall, or at a bare minimum, you might break an ankle. Just like in The Dark Knight when he's going to drop Sal off the top of the building. Well, there you go. You might break an ankle if you fall from there. But very, very interesting. An image that is very difficult to explain. I mean, are we to really believe that they spent 50 years clearing all these hills, all these ridgelines that just happen to be around these buildings, that they built these buildings right next to this pile of dirt? Hey, I want to build this nice brick building. Let's put it right next to the pile of dirt. It makes perfect sense. Let's do it. Would anybody really be keen on doing that? And what would anybody say during this time frame if you suggested that you were going to regrade all this? Well, if you're going to regrade all this, in other words, level it, that's the other term they have. And by the way, that's what they say for Kansas City. They didn't regrade it, they leveled it. It was that easy. You've got to tear these buildings down, or you've got to move them. Yeah, there you go. Carol says it really nicely. Digging out buildings. That's what it looks like to me. Now, again, I'm just saying that's what it looks like. I'm not making a definitive conclusion, so. But that's what you see when you look at these images. And again, they're not regrading it, they're just leveling it. I just included this one because here we have this very, very lovely roundhouse. And you know how I like these roundhouses from the old rail days in Kansas City. And we can kind of get an idea of what things look like. This almost looks like it's a retaining wall, though. You might recall some of those dramatic retaining walls. Now, maybe it's not a retaining wall. It just kind of looks like one. But then on top of it, you have these other structures. And so again, I'm not wondering if there's a lot more to the story or the actual unfolding of events in Kansas City that we're not aware of. Got the nice little cone tower here. I mean, what are these? Houses? Tenements? Is this a church back here? Interesting structures. And again, I'm not saying I know all the answers, and I don't know when this image is from. I mean, it looks like you got the main thoroughfare here. Oh, looks like we've even got a little trolley. One-line trolley and some tracks going right up here into town. Very, very nice. But again, and if you've been to Kansas City, you know that the terrain still follows this same general pattern. Now, granted, yes, it has been smoothed out a bit, at least from what this image shows us, but it generally follows the same pattern. So again, I'm going to ask that question, how much leveling, as they call it, was really done? If only we could find more of these roundhouses that remained intact. Yes, I know some of the historically preserved ones have, but I would love to find an authentic one. Really just because I would like to test, what's the strength of the materials and so forth. No, not with a machine, just by interfacing with it. And here we have our preview of Union Station. Now, we're going to take a special look at Union Station. You may recall that's that very impressive train station that was constructed there early 1900s, circa 1911 to 1914, has the really, really tall ceilings, which everyone loves to tell me it's just because they kept buildings cool. Okay, sure. You just build a tall ceiling. They just didn't do it on any other building. Well, I know it's because Tom Pendergrast wasn't around and he hadn't conceptualized that yet. When he was sitting at home on his sofa before he got charged with tax evasion. So, and what's intriguing about this is supposed to show you this connection, this tunnel that they were building that connects Union Station to a nearby structure. I guess, maybe. But yes, it is one of those interesting images. And of course, those very advanced counterweight cranes that we used all the time. We never see any shortage of those. And then a colorized photo. And of course, I'm a little reluctant to trust these photos, but again, it does give a very dramatic concept of what's actually going on, where it appears that there's just a lot of soil. And again, are they just using shovels and shoveling it into these carts and then having these horse teams? It looks like we've got 2 whole horse teams here that are pulling away all this dirt. Is that really what's going on here? Now, again, this has been a modified image, but just thought I'd show it because, once again, it's something that's showing us what may be going on. Barbara, there used to be a roundhouse in Weed, California, but can't find any information on it, but recall stories. Seems to be the way it goes with a lot of the roundhouses, Barbara. Sad, but true. So, good question there, Sean. Would the wheels hold? Don't know. And how much weight could you really put in each of those wagons? That's another question that comes to mind. Anyway, this is another dramatic image, again, showing structures that are right next to the piles of dirt. You've got what looks to be some rubble here. This almost looks like a giant column that's fallen, but I don't know for sure. And we just have another little horse-pulled wagon. And you see this. There's nothing more, So, again, my whole theory or suggestion that there were steam-driven tractors, or could have been, no, there's no images that ever support that. So, no, I was just asking why that wasn't developed, why that technology wasn't perfected. That's all I was asking before, but someone seems to always think that I'm making some kind of grand conclusion. Right here, I'm just trying to figure out why we have what's clearly a brick building here that's on top of this bluff, and yet we have these other buildings that are built right next to this existing bluff. Is that what really happened? Very, very interesting. Now, what do I think could have happened? Could there have actually been a bluff there? Could they have built the buildings at a different point in time? Or could it have been a sign of that liquefaction process, the mud flood? Well, ultimately, it's up to you to decide. But again, one thing I want you to consider, you are settling a city, you are building a city where one did not exist, you're establishing all the infrastructure for the city, so you have to be able to sustain it. In other words, feed all the people, provide them water. That takes a lot of resources. You have to provide all these construction materials. And then in the midst of doing all that, and keep in mind, you have immigration going on. You have a civil war in the 1860s, and after that civil war, you still have what's called the Plains Indian Wars going on. You have multiple economic panics. This is just the 1800s. And through all of this, you have the ability and decide that you're going to level your entire city, which involves moving, digging down very large piles of dirt, natural terrain features, hills, ridgelines, bluffs as they call them, and you're either going to move the buildings or you're going to tear them down. You're going to devote all those resources and all that effort just to make the city more level. That is what the official record tells us. And so you can see why this becomes very contentious, why this becomes very difficult to just simply accept at face value. Yeah, there you go, Heidi. City, city, cityscape, as though it was already there. So Leo, looks like the people digging out their bombed out buildings in World War II. It does have a similarity to that, doesn't it, Leo? Very, very interesting. Sean with a good comment here. Volcanic ash becomes mud. Yes. What exactly is volcanic ash and when do we see it? I'm not really sure. But, we have many well documented volcanic eruptions. So, again, make of it what you will. And you'll see these images of Kansas City with some of these more elaborate structures and, again, things looking a little bit more leveled out. And I always suggest going to visit the plaza. This is probably one of my favorite ones. Again, not one of the best pictures, but tells you exactly where it is. 2nd Street between Delaware and Main Streets. May 1869. Mechanics Bank building on the left. Is that the Mechanics Bank building? Is that the Mechanics Bank building? Not really sure. So it's the 1860s, according to this image, and you're going to build a bank building right next to this giant bluff of dirt? Okay, I guess. I like to think that the bankers are the sensible people and deal in terms of numbers. Why would they ever say, yes, we're going to invest in building a building here? Well, because there's going to be a panic in the 1870s. And again, you can play that inflation game and you can tear down and build as many buildings as you like. Well, there's the economic explanation for it. I'm being facetious, of course. But there is no shortage of lost, incredible structures in Kansas City. And that's what always keeps it very, very interesting. So let's take a close look here at Union Station, because Union Station itself, which still exists to this day, and I strongly suggest you visit it, and we did do an on the ground of it. It's been converted now into a shrine for the Kansas City Chiefs. Surprise, surprise. Hold on. Image is taking 1 second to come up. And I'm having some technical difficulties here. What a surprise. All right, here we go. Present. And Union Station in Kansas City. So remember, very early part of the 20th century. Let me make sure you can see this. And there you go. And here you see our very convincing construction images that we have. What fascinates me, though, about Union Station, so 1911, 1914, is we see a lot of the same things that we saw with the Iowa State Capitol. So you have all this dirt and all this debris well clear of where the actual Union Station is being constructed, again, taking the official historical record at face value. But you have all these little shacks here, but yet some of these look to be more than shacks. And it seems as though there's a much more extensive project going on here. Why would anybody need to clear all this out? I mean, the station itself is right here. And if you forgot how large or impressively large this station is, we'll take a look at it. But the other thing that I find interesting about it is nobody else decided to build any buildings with these very tall roofs on it to keep people cool, because that's the official explanation. I even had somebody tell me in the comments that shouldn't even have to look that up. It's just common knowledge. Oh, okay. That's a good way to defend the official record. Don't even reference it. Just say it's common knowledge. I like that. And then here's another image of when they're actually digging out the foundation, I guess. And again, you can see that the amount of terrain that they seem to be working on is a lot more extensive than the terrain that the station itself sits on. And there's a lot of interesting developments with Kansas City in the early 20th century or the early 1900s, however you want to say it, at least that's attributed to it. I mean, what exactly is going on here? We have all this dirt and these bridges, all what looks to be this excavation. Oh, look, we've got one of our steam-driven diggers right here. Well, if these things were that efficient and they could really move this much dirt and do it in a very quick amount of time, why do we ever go away from them? I know, safety, environmental considerations, so on and so forth. Or, because the petroleum companies had their little move to make sure everybody operated on fossil fuels. Yes, I suppose, but however it was done, whatever vehicles we had, it is very impressive. Imagine excavating all this with today's technology. Sky cranes, bulldozers, excavators. How long would it take? Would you even be able to excavate it in a short amount of time? Because remember, according to this image, this is much more extensive than just the grounds that the Union Station would eventually be placed upon. So I find that very, very interesting. Yeah, exactly. Question marks for all. And yet here with Union Station. And, you've also got other images that show, looks like we got a little snow on the ground here in 1910. So this is before they got it up. But yes, it's a intersection of trains. So you would think they just bring all the infrastructure in with trains. But it seems like they were doing something else entirely. Oh, here we go. One of our little train excavators. Ah, yes. Look at the size of that. You could have all that excavated in no time, I'm sure. Now, granted, they didn't work on excavating Union Station for 50 years. They said they did it in a very short amount of time. Obviously, it didn't take them a couple years. They did it in a very, very quick time, at least if we go off the official historical account. And then looking at some of these other images here, showing us what the skyline of Kansas City looked like. Very, very interesting. Some very unique structures, lots of spires. Oh yeah, we just built a lot of churches. Looks like we got a little dome over here. One of the early courthouses maybe, or at least that's what we'll be informed. And again, a lot of smokestacks and a lot of interesting towers. Kind of the same thing you see when you look at Cincinnati from that early time frame. Now, I appreciate an image like this because in the archive, they said that they were repairing this bridge. Does this guy really look like he's repairing anything? I don't know. Maybe they just made a mistake in the archive. I just thought it was kind of funny to look at. But then they show other images like this where they're apparently doing a repair or something. I mean, is that what they're actually doing? What are the ladders for? If you're actually excavating anything, then what do you actually have these ladders up there for? Unless these ladders were access to climb up these bluffs, or should we just say these soil deposits? I can't imagine what actually would have deposited this soil. But there's actually a plethora of images that do support that that's what's actually going on here, that they're just trying to just maneuver their way around all of this buildup of soil. Well, that's why they had to level it, of course. But remember, these images are not attributed to the leveling of Kansas City. These images are attributed to the construction of Union Station. So what to make of it, I don't know. Maybe it's an error. Maybe somebody made a genuine error. It does happen. But you look at some of the more extensive images. Now, I could actually buy this one being an image that shows the actual excavation of the foundation. But when you consider what a colossal building Union Station is, I don't know. Oh, here we go. Here's one of our little steam-driven tractors. So you see they did have them, and they did actually work. What are they doing with it? Well, it's just sitting there not doing anything, I guess. So I just thought it was funny. But you see other images like this. I mean, and consider the infrastructure that needed to be put in place to allow these trains to move. And I think that's what makes Union Station interesting. Now, here I've got the modern image in case you forgot of just how extensive and large Union Station is today. Now, like I said, because it's located in Kansas City, it's now become a shrine to the Kansas City Chiefs. That's fine. At least it's still standing, and it's a beautiful building. Now, once again, we have this account of numerous restorations. And we have our favorite restoration company that was involved in restoring the ceiling. Because during those dark years from the 1960s to the 1980s, they let the building fall into disrepair. But it has since been renovated, and you can get an idea of how extensive and large it is on the inside. Now, once again, the tall ceilings, that nice commenter who told me the whole reason they did that, and you don't need to even verify it, it's common knowledge that they built the high ceilings to cool the building off. Yeah, sure. That's how you explain every large interior of every old world building. It was just to keep people cool. Right. Okay. You want to accept that? Be my guest. I just find it very interesting that that's the explanation. So just give you an idea of what the interior of that beauty looks like today. Hey, Ubu, I used to board the train there when I was a kid. Yeah. And it's quite extensive when you see the large arches, the tall ceilings, and it's just an incredible palace anywhere you walk in it. So anyway, one of the reasons why I decided to include it. And you would think it would have been a Herculean construction effort, but this is what we're left with. So was it built? Was it already there and they just had to dig it out and repair it? Did they salvage it? It's ultimately up to you to decide. But I think we can tell what these images are showing us, especially this one. Now, here's something I'll pose to all of you, just a thought experiment, or really just a comparison. Think of the beauty and the intricacy and the geometric precision of all these structures, whether we're talking in a state capitol, a massive train station. Look at what we see in these construction images. Typically, we see what looks to be a pile of debris or blocks that are piled up all around it. We've got some of these cranes. What I'm getting at is that it seems as though there's really no methodical approach to the construction of the building. There's a lot of debris spewed about, and they just kind of built it willy-nilly, And I'm using terms like willy-nilly because that's what it feels like. They just kind of threw it together. Okay, we could build an incredible building like that in a very short amount of time in the early 20th century, throwing it together. We could build the Iowa State Capitol like that by just having debris all in front of it and then throwing it together. Today, though, with modern equipment, we don't build buildings like this. Now, people will say it's because we have safety standards, there's environmental considerations, and it's prohibitively expensive. And I don't want to hear prohibitively expensive. That's just total malarkey. They spent $6 trillion just to run the United States government in the year of 2024. And there's no limits on going into debt. So I do not accept the argument that we just don't have the money now. We didn't have the money in the past because you couldn't go into debt in the past. We didn't have the Federal Reserve until 1913, remember? But whatever, believe what you will. I'm just saying I don't accept the whole money argument. That's a very poor argument, I think. Yeah, good point there, Sky Sage. It does look burned, kind of just like the Iowa State Capitol did. I'm sure that's just another coincidence. So, but yes, I know, public buildings, and you could just say they could spend infinitely in debt. Well, guess what? We can spend infinitely in debt today, but nobody's building buildings like this. I guess they're just not popular. And these are some of the other images that you'll see that show this intense excavation going on. Yeah, I guess that little digger over there did all of this by itself, right? Sure it did. I mean, you can believe it if you want to. But again, I'll pose the question, if they were that effective, if they're that efficient, why'd we ever go away from them? I know. Tom Pendergrass came around and he said, no more steam-driven diggers. I'm running a political machine here, and steam-driven diggers just don't cut it. Yeah, you want to believe that? Be my guest. Then you get some other images like this where I don't know exactly what they're doing here. Very, very intriguing. And, there's another anomaly that we've explored that's right across the way from Union Station, Kansas City, and that's Liberty Tower, the World War I monument. And I just thought I'd finish here on this little image showing you some of the intricacies in the ceiling. Yes. So not only do you have 100-foot tall ceilings that help with cooling the building, I guess this decoration keeps it cool because people are always looking up. And when they look up at the decorations, they breathe up in the air, and that helps keep it cool. I mean, is that the reason for the decorations? I'm just waiting for someone to try throwing that one in the comments. I'm not saying it makes me laugh. I just, again, find it very, very interesting. So anyway, that's it for Kansas City. Let's take a look at our next city before we take our little bit of a break. And you may recall this one. We'll go back and take a look at the great city of Omaha, which coincidentally is just north of Kansas City, and you just go north on the Missouri River. Now, you may recall in our little exploration of Omaha, we've got a similar story where they did this very impressive regrading project. And, in Omaha, they didn't call it leveling, they called it regrading. That's what they were doing. There's an odd anomaly with the terrain when you go from Omaha to Iowa. There's hills when you're west of the Missouri River, and then when you go east of the Missouri River, it starts to flatten out really fast, and there's really not a lot of trees out there. So yes, in Omaha, again, about the same time frame, 1880 to 1910, it's always in that questionable time frame, they had to regrade the city. There were hills where we didn't want hills. There were bluffs where we didn't want bluffs. Now, here they actually show images of bringing in an entire train and using the steam digger to dig all this out. Okay. I mean, is that really what they're doing? Are they actually moving entire hills or bluffs? Or again, are they just clearing up some of this dirt that just happened to be compiled near these buildings? I don't know. It's up to you to decide what to think on it. You also have other strange images from Omaha that show a lot of overgrowth and, oddly enough, a very arid terrain. And it doesn't look like it's winter here. Now, when I say arid or desiccated, I know people have gotten confused by that, so I'll just spell it out. It looks like it's a frickin' desert. Now, yes, if you go out further in the plains, there's less water if you go to the west of it, but it's just very, very odd that we always get this kind of appearance with these cities, especially in the Midwest. And keep in mind, we're right next to Iowa, which is the breadbasket of the Midwest, where they've got the finest soil, and you can grow corn and soybeans to your heart's content. But just a very interesting image showing some of these well-constructed buildings in the midst of some of these lesser constructed houses. Some of these lesser constructed houses. And then just dead trees all over the place. Now it looks like we got some life down here with some of these trees, and you could say, well, it's because it's a black and white photo. Maybe. But it's just another one of those things that creates a lot of questions. Yes. Again, what are they doing right here? Well, this is part of this regrading project by the very impressively constructed courthouse, the Douglas County Courthouse around Omaha. I think that's what this was. Yeah, I'm shooting from the hip here, but that's okay because, again, it's another image that's showing us, oh, look, we just need our horses and our wagon. And maybe we got some individuals digging here. I can't quite be sure. But what does it really look like is going on here? Are they going to regrade this? Are we going to throw the entire county courthouse on the back of something, maybe some train cars and move it down the hill a little bit? Is it really that easy in that time frame? Is that what's really going on here? Yeah, there you go. The smokestack. Absolutely right, Sky Sage. And that tends to give you all the evidence of that's what's going on. And then here's another very dramatic image of it. I love these very impressively built structures here, looking very castle-like. Yes, we just built castles all the time in the United States. Administration buildings, city halls, prisons, whatever use we have for them. But then you have these mounds of dirt here. Is that what's going on here? I mean, very, very intriguing. And again, you can see the massive dirt that covers the road completely. But it looks like we've got some rudimentary power lines here. What year is this photo from? Attributed to the 1890s, I suppose. And again, another well-constructed house here, right next to what it looks to be a pile of dirt. So all very, very interesting. And once again, you have the same thing here. But it's just very, very strange. I mean, what exactly is this structure? Little portal right here. So two cities, and I just included this image, Omaha City in 1865, because this is, I guess, a picture. I guess this is a picture. I mean, the archive says it's a picture, but this is to give us an idea of what Omaha looked like when they laid out the initial buildings. I guess we're just not seeing all the bluffs. I mean, can you imagine if someone told you, we're going to completely level this entire ridge line here. We're going to spend the next 30 years doing it. By the way, you're going to have to tear down your hotel. You're going to have to tear down your very well-built mansion or your house because we're going to level it. All right, I suppose. Now, again, if you want to accept this as a photograph, be my guest. I mean, I'm telling you that's what the archive says. It says it's a photograph, but yeah, looking northwest, sure. But then you have other images such as this, which once again just show you this complete pile of dirt that looks like it's been there for a long period of time. We've got one of these little diggers in operation right here. And then very, very peculiar, where it looks like the structure is built on top of the pile of dirt. Or is there more to this structure that's below the pile of dirt? And they're just clearing it off. I don't know. It's what it kind of looks like to me. I mean, this other structure looks like it's been cleared out. But again, you have to come to your own conclusions. I'm just telling you what it looks like the photograph is showing. Now, I didn't take it. I don't know what year it's from, but very, very interesting. And something that really is on display when we look at places like Omaha. Don't throw me. Yeah, exactly. So, random FX. Always the wide streets and tram lines, yet horse and cart. Yeah, it is rather peculiar, isn't it? Why do you need wide streets and tram lines for just horse and cart? So, and as KC933 says, very, very suspicious. And I certainly agree. Now, we've already looked at the Church of Mary Magdalene. I figured we'll just take another quick look at it because it is considered one of the most definitive buildings that shows mud flood evidence. And if you didn't see the other exploration, I'm just going to show it to you real quick here because it is rather dramatic. And the Church of Mary Magdalene is, of course, still present in Omaha. You can see what it looks like today. Let me go full image on it. And so what do you have here? Well, a lot of people say, you see, there was a door right here, and there's stairs going to nowhere. And it was built up on top of one of these mounds, apparently, just on top of this mound of dirt, and then they cleared it. Very, very interesting how the dirt looks when they're clearing it, doesn't it? I don't ever see dirt that looks like that, but maybe it's just from the black and white photo, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there was something else going on that we're not privy to. But as they cleared it, then what they said they did, and the official record confirms this, they then built the lower levels. So they literally built this building top to bottom. Now, something that is very interesting is that this particular door here just happens to be a nice window. And oddly enough, you look, it has the exact same format, the arch, as the other windows. I don't know. This was the original door, was it not? What happened to the door here? Did they brick it in? I don't know. And then they built it lower. That's what the official record says. And again, we've got all the dirt still left on the road because they cleared it. Not sure what happened to this building back here, but all very interesting, isn't it? So moving on past this dramatic example, let's take a look at a few more images and try to get an idea. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. So yeah, here you just have the door sitting up here in the air, I guess. It just happens to have the exact same format as the windows. Nice cymatic window up there. And then they built it lower. Really? They actually put the bricks in the ground and dug up the ground? Is that really what happened? I mean, that's what the record says. And, why would anybody be mistaken? And more importantly, why would anybody lie about that? I'm not saying anybody would. But you look at some of the other images, such as the courthouse, and you can see it's got the same phenomenon going on, again in Omaha as well. But I think the Church of Mary Magdalene is that dramatic example because was this ever really a door? Or was it always meant to be a window? Was it a window that was converted in a door because, it was at ground level at that point and they had to dig out the surrounding area? I don't know. And again, here is another view of Mary Magdalene. And here you can see when this was ostensibly a door, I guess. Here you've got the other door with the stairs going to nowhere. So if you were in the process of removing all that, wouldn't you remove the stairs first? And it's very strange. Oh, let's just leave the stairs hanging out there and then we can remove them then. It'll be easier that way. I mean, why not? We can build a building from top down and actually build the bricks in the ground. That makes sense, doesn't it? It'll be very, very suitable. And guess what? That structure is still standing to this day. But you have these odd images that seem to paint a different picture. Much like we saw with the images of the temple in Salt Lake City, the Capitol in Des Moines in Iowa, it appears as though there is actually some infrastructure that's already there. Is it the foundation? Well, if it's the foundation, then they darn well didn't build it into the ground, did they? But that's what the record says they did. So I don't know. And that's probably why this is considered one of the most dramatic examples of the classic mud flutter building. Oh yeah, let's just leave the doors in up here, We'll build the floors in, then we'll go out and put a window in there. Okay. I mean, if you want to accept that, be my guest. Maybe that's good enough for you. Maybe there's no reason to question things. I completely understand it. I mean, I would think if they knew they were going to do that, then they would have already put the window in here and they would have already removed the stairs. It would be easier. But, it's the 1800s. You could just do whatever the heck you wanted to. Here's what the structure looks like today. I know it's not the best picture. And oddly enough, despite all the leveling, it looks like we still have slant construction going on here. Very, very interesting. And so, yes, that's Omaha, Church of Mary Magdalene. Hey, Donna Marie. Thanks for joining us today. Now, let me show you something else. So we've looked at Kansas City and we've looked at Omaha. I want to show you something else that's very peculiar about these two cities. And I haven't mentioned this before, and perhaps I should have in the on-the-ground explorations, but I'll mention it now. So let me share the screen with you. There's something very peculiar that these cities share. They actually have the exact same building in both Omaha and Kansas City. Now, in Omaha, it's called the Omaha Building or the Omaha Life Insurance Building. And in Kansas City, it's called the New York or the New York Insurance Building. And you may recall that I've looked at both these structures, although I actually got on the ground and looked at the one in Kansas City. And yes, built in the late 1800s, 1890s, apparently. And so this is the Omaha Building. This is the one in Omaha. And once again, you can see nice old world building. Very, very impressive construction. Little columns up there in the windows. But yet, despite all the leveling, it still has slant construction. Well, go be darned, didn't they level Omaha? Well, maybe they just weren't finished at that point in time. But then in Kansas City, they have the exact same building. Well, I know, and you know what the defenders of the mainstream records will say is, yeah, it was a classic building design. Okay, sure it was. Oh, by the way, in Kansas City, it also has the same slant construction on it. The heck you say. Why would that be? I always really appreciate the placement of the blocks in these structures. I would really just be amazed if anybody could do that today. Now, not with the facading material that we use, but the actual genuine redstone granite, whatever the heck this is supposed to be. But yes, what a coincidence. Two cities that had regrading or leveling projects done in the same time frame that have the exact same building. The exact same building that has the slant construction on it. The coincidence of all coincidences. Yeah, maybe it's following a line, Tom. I mean, I don't know for sure. But that's what makes it very, very interesting. Chassis with a great comment here. I'm sure a lot of the buildings were built in diverse cities. And there's probably many that were lost that had to be torn down over time for that very reason. So, Atticus, except instead of Eagle, it's one of the presidents, I think. Yeah, and there's no doubt that they've renovated them over time to change certain things. So, and yes, Donna, please go ahead and hit that like and support the channel. I appreciate it. Well, I'm going to keep driving on a little bit more because we've got a few more examples that we're going to look at, and then we'll go into our theories. And I'd be remiss if I didn't go out to the West Coast and take a look at something. And what are we going to take a look at out on the West Coast? Well, guess what? We've got evidence out there on the West Coast that there was extensive regrading that happened in one of the cities with one of the most dramatic population explosions ever seen. And we are going to the great city of Seattle. I know people might contest that adjective, but that's all right. Because what the city of Seattle did was truly great. They regraded their entire city in a very short amount of time. And that's where we see some of the most dramatic examples of this regrading project, where you just have these massive mounds of dirt that are sitting out here that have structures on them, amongst them. And what they tell us is, much like with Omaha and Kansas City, the good people of Seattle decided to regrade their entire city. They decided to remove all these pesky hills. I guess they even did it with high pressure water, apparently. I mean, I'm not sure what to make of this image. Very, very interesting in Seattle. And by the way, if you recall the Seattle exploration, they had incredible population growth there. You know, we're talking a percentage increase in a few short decades of thousands of percent. Ah, yes, something very, very easy to do. Yeah, it does look like a scene for Planet of the Apes or Logan's Run. So, yeah, possible mounds or something. I mean, again, it's interesting how the nature of the terrain looks exactly the same, the dirt, in other words, as it did in Kansas City and Omaha. Another coincidence, I'm sure. I mean, what's exactly going on here? Look at this. You've actually got a stairway coming right down here, and this appears to have fallen out. Very strange. Oh, they regraded it. It was just that easy. It was the 1890s. It was the early 1900s. Okay. We have these super high pressure hoses that we use just to wash everything away. Okay. Well, darn. Why didn't they think of that in Omaha or Kansas City? You know, and you can see the differences here. They claim they had to move this entire hotel, and then they removed that hill, I guess. Regrade changes in Seattle. Washington Hotel and Denny Hill. Denny Hill was the target of the regrade, apparently. Before regrade, 1906. New Washington Hotel after regrade in 1908. Let me get this straight here. According to these images, this is 1906, and 2 short years later, you have this in 1908. Really? Really? That's all it took was 2 years? I mean, you know how long it takes just to resurface a road these days, even the interstate, when they have all the resources dedicated to it. They managed to accomplish this in 1906 to 1908? That is very impressive. And I think that's why Seattle really stands out in that particular way. Oh, that's a good one. More like Benny Hill. I can hear the theme playing right now, Charles. Great comment there. So, but yes, that's exactly what they tell us is the situation in Seattle. Oh, and this is a very interesting old building, and it still stands to this day. And this is the United Methodist Church in Seattle. Love the old dome on that one, and the old cupola, if you will. But then you've got other images like this that kind of give you the same, dare I say, impression that we had from Kansas City and Omaha. Just a lot of dirt and ground all over the place. I mean, here, what do we got? People just kind of sitting and standing around. Yeah, look, it's a pipe, Fred. Oh, yeah, it's a pipe. Let's get a picture of that. They say this is part of the regrading from the archive, I suppose. And then you have other interesting images like this. Here you got this house right here. I mean, was the house somehow brought down from the top of this remaining mound? Why wasn't this mound or this hill dug out already? What exactly is going on here? I don't know. I'm not sure. It's very dramatic looking. And then looking in the background here, got this nice building here, and then everything's on a nice uniform slope over here. All very, very interesting. And then, of course, the remains of Denny Hill. All right. Is that the remains of it then? These 2 giant mounds on either side, and then someone already built a house down here in the middle of it? I guess. Also interesting when you look closely at some of this rubble and debris here. I mean, what have we got going on here? Almost like we've got a little boat here, some pipes. I'm not really sure. Oh, again, another one of those high pressure washers. Is this one even manned? Is anyone even on this one? Or is it an automated pressure washer that they had? That's how they cleared it away. They just washed it away with high pressure water. It was just that easy. Now, a question I'm going to leave you with. Does anybody regrade or level cities anywhere in the land today with all the incredible modern equipment that we have? I wonder what any city council or county commissioners would say, just going off the United States, and considering the rest of the land, if you told them, we would like to spend hundreds of millions or billions of dollars just to regrade the terrain. We're going to have to move buildings. We're going to have to move vast amounts of dirt. It's easy. We'll just do it right now. I wonder how they'd respond to that. Well, I mean, you see how they responded just trying to do simple things. Yeah, Heidi says it very well. No. Donna Marie, that house next to the mud pile. I know. It gets comical after a point when you look at enough of it and you see it going far enough. Yes, more of that regrading. I mean, I guess we got some tracks here, so there's a little bit more of an explanation for it, maybe. Say you just throw it in this little train here, and this is one of those very narrow gauge tracks. Hey, I thought we got rid of all the narrow gauges with that massive gauge moving project that they did in 36 hours down south. Well, I guess they still use some narrow gauges. Maybe they did for little trains here as part of this regrading. Or maybe, just maybe, they had when they were south digging this stuff. I don't know. I mean, again, it does look like they're just digging it out, does it not? And of course, you'll say they were. They were regrading it because we've got all these resources. Remember, we're way out on the west coast of the United States. The rest of the country is still being settled. These panics during all these difficulties, and it's no problem to do all this. And back to that United Methodist Church, did in 1910. And the reason I showed it is we've got some more slant construction on it. Yeah, why not? So all very, very interesting. And this is Pioneer Square in Seattle. And they say that this building structure, yes, I mean, maybe, they just kind of threw together these bricks and these blocks in a schlocky way. But then you got this beauty back here. No one's building like this today. There's image with all these power lines, I suppose. How very intriguing. So something else that always gets my interest, though, about these claims of regrading. They're doing the regrading here with these tracks, and we've got another one of our little diggers that's on the tracks. Okay, fine, that's sensible enough. But we have a bridge that's already built over it. What's exactly with that? Huh? Why would we have a bridge that's already built? Never mind. I'm just not even going to ask at this point. But yes, you'll get these dramatic images with Seattle. So that's 3 cities in the United States. We say it's regrading. We say it's leveling. Omaha, Kansas City, and Seattle, where we did this. Apparently in Seattle, they just did it with high pressure water. Oh, man, they were really ahead of the ball game, weren't they? That's all it takes, just high pressure water. Just wash massive amounts of terrain, hills, ridge lines, bluffs. Just get that water. They apparently had that capability in the 1800s. Oh, and I just thought to include this little bird's eye view. This is Seattle circa 1891. Well, the main part of the city doesn't look like you really have to involve any regrading. I mean, maybe if you got out here to where these bluffs are, but this is just a bird's eye view map, and they don't always show the elevation very well. I just thought it was kind of funny to include it. And so, yes, that's what we have with all this. We have all of these impressive and interesting concepts. Hey, thank you, One Socket True Seeker. I appreciate that. Sorry I missed that. I'm not getting the alerts in the best fashion. And thanks. All right. So what does this all mean? What do we have all this evidence, and what does it tell us? And why does it matter? Do you think that we actually have sufficient evidence of a mud flood occurring? Yeah, there you go. Once ad rather than straight ahead. Good point there. Is there other evidence in other places across the land? Well, we've looked at 3 cities here so far in the United States. I just thought we'd look at a few quick examples here because it's not just in the United States. And would you be surprised to know there's even some questionable things that have occurred in places such as the Bronx? I know you're surprised just because of that rumble in the Bronx that occurred. And we've got images that were informed or when they cut out the subway, apparently. I guess that's what they were doing. Let me make sure you got this on full image. Hey, Donna Marie, thank you. I appreciate that. And welcome to the new member. But you'll see stuff like this, where even in places like Brooklyn, and remember, or the Bronx, Brooklyn or the Bronx, where we've got images like this that show them digging things out. And yet, oddly enough, it looks much like the images that we just saw from Kansas City, Omaha, and Seattle. So it seems to be a lot more widespread than we'd like to think. Oh, look at this beauty. Ah, yes. The things we could build in the 1800s. Now, don't worry, this building still stands to this day. And this is the College of the City of New York, main building. Ah, it's one of those old mains. And here's what it looks like today. Kind of reminds me of Scholastica in Duluth. Looks like it's the exact same construction, too. Another coincidence, I'm sure. Kind of built in the ground a little bit, but why not? Very, very pretty building. Yeah, no one's going to build you a building like this on a college campus. You'll get a nice office-like building for your history department. No, I'm not referring to any specific college. I wouldn't dream of doing that, but let's see what else we got for a little bit of evidence. So that was the Bronx. Oh, and then you may recall when we explored Boston. Yep, I got to include Boston. A little bit of the Willem Dafoe Agent Smecker reference there. But they say they actually moved an entire hill in Boston. Now, granted, we don't have any photographs of it because they moved this hill before photography was invented. And not only did they just move a hill, they moved a hill with horse and cart and one that had a monument on top of it. They even tell us they moved the monument. Well, why not? If we moved houses and government buildings and everything else, moving a column monument, piece of cake. But yep, there's the story for Boston. So again, it's a lot more widespread than we like to think. This account, all this evidence that we have of this major earth moving. Now you're probably asking, well, are there examples of this in places like Europe, where we have a much more extensive history? Well, believe it or not, there's all kinds of evidence from Europe. Ah, yes. And if you look at some of the early images of places like Rome, it gives you that impression that once again, much like we saw with Half Moon Bay, they've just got dirt that surrounds columns here. Oh, the heck you say? That's not possible. And, again, could these images have been modified over time? Are they official images? Is this Mexico City? Is this Paris? I don't know. What's the archive say? It gets very, very interesting. This is a drawn image of Rome, and you'll find these early images of Italy, these paintings and these sketches that, again, give you this impression that it's the same story there, that they had to clear out all this dirt. Yeah, there you go. Good one, Sean. It's just a buried national bank. True that. Oh, looks like I missed one. Hey, Michael, thank you for that, and welcome to the new members. Appreciate that. But that's what you'll see when you look at all this. Random FX, Australia also has such images, despite being a younger country. Yes, so whether it's a younger nation or older nations, according to our official records, we get the same thing. The only variances are they drawn, painted, or actual photographs. Ah, yes. Again, the same thing here from Italy. Building up here on the bluffs, and then we just seem to have all this dirt and all this overgrowth around what's clearly a construction here, but it's just a sketch. Somebody clearly saw this. And here you can see what looks to be an individual here. To give you an idea for scale, very, very impressive. And then there's all these other images of how they renovated these cities. Now, are these legitimate images? Are they altered in some way? Again, you always have to ask that question. But I will tell you, you can go to the Iowa State Capitol. You can go to Salt Lake City Temple to this day, and you'll see things that do look like this in the ground. Massive foundation. Yeah, sure. And you'll find no shortage of historical images from the official record, whether they're from 1917 or the early 1900s, that show you this, I'll just call it the Half Moon Bay phenomenon, of columns that are just covered in dirt by some process or other. So again, it's all just some massive coincidence, I guess. Yes. Can you imagine how long this poor guy took with his pickaxe to really clear all this out? And maybe that's really what he was doing. I mean, that's the image I'm getting here. Does he have a pickaxe or a shovel? I guess it's just a shovel. But just imagine all the effort that would take. Be very, very careful when you dig it out. I want to preserve those columns. Yeah, why wouldn't you? And I mean, look at the detail on these columns. How long was this actually in this dirt? What kind of forces were these subjected to? And so that's what makes it very, very interesting. Here, one of the early images, you got the Colosseum in the background, what you actually find in Rome. And of course, this is explained by the fact that we've got a 2,000-year history plus in Rome. There was the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic. There were all these other nation states that were involved in this, and that's how we explain this. It's just a coincidence that it looks a heck of a lot like what we just looked at in the United States in Seattle, Kansas City, and Omaha. Yes, it's a coincidence. All right. If that's what you really want to accept, yeah, there you go, Win. Then that's what you've got. And so this evidence is everywhere. But now we have to ask these hard questions. Was this a natural event? Yeah, there you go. Found ancient city. Well, that's exactly what Rome looks like when you look at those older images. Was this a natural event or was this technologically caused? And so we'll go on from what we're looking at with the best mud flood evidence to go through that. The concept of liquefaction, the very well documented and very recently documented process of liquefaction. And we'll look at the scientific diagrams that we have and some examples of liquefaction. And here you have it. Let me make sure you got this full image. So asking that question, is liquefaction a natural event or technologically caused? Well, scientifically, it's a natural event from earthquakes. Yeah, you're leaning ahead of me there, Sean, but that's fine. And how frequency melts things. Yes, keep that in mind. So is this a natural event or is this technologically caused? Well, here you have liquefaction, an example. All these buildings in this street completely reduced to nothing. And here you have it here with this little diagram of what liquefaction actually is. You have stable soil before the earthquake. You've got the topsoil and the sand. You've got everything that the foundation of the buildings and the roads, the infrastructure of the roads are built in. The soil becomes liquefied, the process of liquefaction during and after the earthquake. The buildings can tilt, sink, and fail, the houses and the cars and the roads. And again, this is a very well documented modern scientific process that has an explanation to it. So the soil supports the construction. Then after the event occurs, just earthquakes, right? Buildings can tilt, sink, and fail. That doesn't really happen. Oh no, it does happen. There are many documented and very recent examples of this happening. Yeah, there you go, Leo. Definitely a weaponized way to reset or rest everything. Absolutely. Nana, I would guess trolls are all well, there might be some other explanation behind it. Frequency, we'll get to that in a second, Sean, but yes, keep that in mind. But all I'm saying is that, yes, this is a documented current scientific process of liquefaction. And what's this look like? Well, we've got multiple examples here. Buildings, cars, infrastructure. Let's get some more dramatic examples. Oh yeah, look at this. Boy, I'd hate to see my Honda go up or, my old Jeep go right into the mud. That would be terrible. But yeah, this is what happened. Oh, look at that. Well, at least it's back in the days before the Tundra, right? Somebody might get that joke. But yeah, all of a sudden your car's just sucked up by the liquefaction. Whoa, that's really terrible. Completely losing your entire vehicle. And yet there's older images that they attribute to liquefaction. Yeah, that's right. Liquefaction here in San Francisco, 1906, which by the way is not too far from Half Moon Bay, coincidentally enough, where we have this structure that's been a victim of liquefaction. Well, at least it wasn't a victim of creating fire breaks or other strange things that happened, or, the United States Army going in there and destroying buildings to try to create fire breaks. I don't know, you might be able to recover this, right? But again, it does give you that explanation. Look at the roof on this one. What exactly is this? Look at that. I've got like a little ray device on the top of my on the top of my house. How intriguing. But yes, attributed to liquefaction back in 1906. And then other dramatic images, whether we're looking at China or wherever, where you've got these modern buildings. Clearly, these are Fifth Era buildings. I'm not going to debate that have fallen over because, if you don't have a foundation, it doesn't really matter what kind of building you have. You need a foundation to hold your building up. It's kind of one of those things that's, just needed. So, but what could be causing all of it? What could be causing all this liquefaction? What if it is some kind of technology? Well, what sort of technology would do that? How would it actually function? And why would we care about it? Well, we go back to the concept of frequency generators. Why do we have all of these churches that still exist in all these hills? Why do we have all these concepts of frequency that come from these churches? Why do they have these massive windows on them? And you may recall the exploration I did in the distant past, where we were trying to figure out if the windows were actually filled in or if they were just patterns. Could it have been possible that all these massive structures that still exist to this day were actually resonance generators, that they generated some kind of frequency? For example, Holy Hill here in beautiful Hubertus, Wisconsin, 30 miles northwest of Milwaukee, built up on a hill in the 1930s, so the record says, and you can see this building about 10 miles away. Has these massive towers, and oddly enough, it looks like it has another one of these windows that could generate frequency. So imagine if these buildings were part of some old infrastructure, some old technological system that generated and emanated frequency. And what if these buildings were subverted? What if they were taken over by some other force or even by some corrupted force and their technology was used, going back to the concept of the organ, when was the organ invented? That's interesting, to generate this frequency and blast the land with this frequency, and it was actually an artificially induced liquefaction. In other words, this technology was subverted, and as a result, that's what caused the liquefaction. And that's why we have everything melted everywhere. Yeah, there you go, Mark. Which came first, the castles in America or the castles in Europe? Very good question. Maybe they came at the same time. Hard to say. I mean, people say the castles in Europe came much sooner, but we just don't know. But is that the explanation? Why isn't the United States on all these hills we have all these impressive churches? Even in these very small towns or these unincorporated villages like, I don't know, Petersburg, Iowa, or Dyersville, Iowa. Ah, yes, good old Dyersville. And we have these very impressive and large organs all over the place. By the way, if anybody knows where this is, I did show this building earlier. I'll just say it. This is the massive organ in the Tabernacle in Salt Lake City. Ah, yes. Very, very impressive. And then here's another image of it. So what was really the purpose behind all these? And the further back in the past you go, the more ornate and elaborate these organs get. And they just happen to resemble the fasces symbol that we saw everywhere. Again, I'm sure it's another big, huge coincidence. So anyway, not to pontificate or to elaborate too much longer, but to really get right to the point. Theories of when and why this mud flood happened. So we have all this evidence of all these mud floods occurring in all these cities. You can write it off and say the historical account is correct. They just regraded them, they just leveled them and did it in a short amount of time, despite limited expenses and finances and personnel and so on and so forth. Or you can actually look and consider what the real theory is. When did it happen? And why did it happen? And how did it happen? And really, going back to the when, we look at the 5 eras theory. And there's a reason why, in the 5 eras theory, I divided up when the last reset could have occurred. And again, it's theoretical. I don't know. I wasn't there when it all went down. But I think it's important to understand when it may have happened. Could it have happened in the year that we think of as 1750, 1800, 1850? Yes, that could have been when it happened. Now, there's other researchers out there and some other individuals that will vehemently say that it's not true just because they say so, and that's the extent of their evidence. And they'll issue an insult, and then that's that. And that's fine if they want to think that. That's all good. And, they might have some legitimate theories. I'm not saying they do. But sometime in the past, and could it have been as recent as 1900? Sure, I don't know. This is merely a theory. And unlike a certain person on a certain TV show, I'm not going to say a theory is a fact or present a theory as a fact. And you know darn well who I'm talking about. I don't have to say his name. Give you a hint. It's 4 letters. But whether this happened 1850, 1900, or earlier, it seems as though we have a lot of evidence, a lot of images, and historical records that do actually support the fact that something very different happened than what our current understanding is. And so it was sometime in the past when we really can't verify it. Yes, Kathy, I guess, just decided to say that name for no real reason. And yes, Kathy, you are correct. So, in any event, whenever this event actually occurred, it's theoretical, but it seems to be related to when this all happened. And I go back to these images that we have of this destruction from the United States Civil War. Because you may recall that while we attribute destruction of certain cities in the South, like here we're looking at Columbia extensively in South Carolina, just about every city in the United States and across the land had a major fire or destruction like this. Now, how does this relate to mud flood? Well, what you'll notice when you look at a lot of these cities and these images is you get the same kind of idea of debris all over the place and dirt all over the place. So, was it really destruction or was it the result of something else? There's a lot of commonalities. There's a lot of consistencies when you look at these destruction images. And that's what makes it so interesting. I mean, here we're not even in a city. We're just out in the middle of some railroad tracks. This is attributed to Sherman's campaign in Georgia. But why does the entire land just look, again, arid and devoid of life? Oh, because they burned everything. Oh, everything was just flammable again? I mean, what was actually here in this building? Why is there dirt and debris all over the place again? It again gives you the impression there was something much more extensive that went on. And by the way, in one of my final responses, we are looking at a Carnegie Library. I believe this is one out of Pennsylvania. And you know, there's thousands of Carnegie libraries in the United States. And again, it's got the slant level construction. But the reason I'm mentioning this is when were all the Carnegie libraries constructed? And remember, what was the real purpose behind the Carnegie libraries? Now, of course, you'll say, if you're an old world theorist, it was simply to give a purpose to all these incredible old world buildings that they had. Yes, but there might have been a more insidious purpose. Because what happens when you have a library in a regional area? Every single book, every single piece of academic information is collected by that library. It is collected and screened. Now, I'm not suggesting that all these Carnegie libraries are responsible for, how shall we say, of intentionally disposing material. But I do know, being a former member of academia myself, that oftentimes there was space limitations. And when you have space limitations, you do have to get rid of some material. Now, yes, I know they'll just give it away. That's what they'll say. Go to your library and get your book giveaway. But that's not what always happened. And you'll find many documented cases of, how shall we say, literature that just simply had to be destroyed. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, it was unintentional. But just think about this. What you really have with this entire system is a centralized control for all the documented information. And suddenly you see an entirely different purpose. And oddly enough, this Carnegie library system, and indeed the entire education library system of the United States, officially being attributed to the late 1800s, early 1900s. Oddly enough, similar programs going in place all over the land at the same time. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And again, going back to that theory that we had of when that particular date is. So, oh, who is that? One moment. Oh, thank you very much. You can find this in the Forbidden Archive that was global. Yeah, that's true. Really does make you wonder. Whoa, cut out there for a second. I guess I'm saying a little too much about the libraries. But yeah, it does really make you wonder about everything when you look at all this and you're trying to put it all together. So, uh, well, and who's really behind the libraries? I'm not suggesting that, again, there's any kind of conspiracy, merely that when you have a new library that's been built, it's going to compound and collect all the works of literature in a given area. And if you look at how extensive the Carnegie Library program was, that suddenly makes sense. So, yeah, Coffee Time says it very well here. I've worked in buildings where they have doors and windows that are now underground. It always makes me think, how? Well, I'll tell you, Coffee Timey, because they built them underground after the fact. They built the building top to bottom. That's what the mainstream will tell you. Sorry, I had to go there. So, Donna Marie spent time in North Dakota with Lakota Native Americans, or wherever they are from, are way more in touch than any average American. Absolutely. Because Native Americans in the United States tend to be wise to, how shall we say, certain approaches that are used. And if you want a good example of that, there's actually a film that somehow got away with documenting it very well. It actually stars Val Kilmer. It's called Thunderheart. I'm quite serious. That film is very direct and very open about how a lot of things happened. And some could argue how a lot of things are still happening. So, anyways. Leo, books are always burned during reset times. Well, yes, Leo, because they just don't have the space to keep them. It's not because anybody's intentionally destroying books, right? So, anyways, I hope you enjoyed and appreciated this exploration of the mud flood and doing this a little bit more directly where we looked at evidence than we considered theories. And as I'll always say, it's ultimately up to you to decide what to think. And if you want to go and accept the recorded history, that's completely fine. And you're welcome here. And if you actually want to debate it openly, be my guest. Of course, when you start with insults and you're trying to throw insults, then, what are you really saying? Not really sure. Another thing to mention from what I have in my files that the oldest map record I managed to acquire, and it's just only a digital archive of this Tartar, existed in 1756, or it could 1736 from memory. Well, Demon, there's also something else with all that, and thank you for that, by the way, and thank you again. I'll just tell you, when it comes to archiving maps, consider all these maps that have been, how shall I say, rediscovered. For example, the Urbano Monte map. That's a very interesting one, and how they found that one. So, yeah, it's a good point though. Question everything. So, well, good. I appreciate that, and I hope you enjoyed it. And where do we go from here? Well, I've got a couple explorations that are really going to look hard at this mud flood theory. And then beyond that, we're also going to look at a new concept called the reset liquidators. In other words, on that concept of destroying remnants of the previous civilization. Yes, there's actually evidence of that that's out there too. So, anyway, well, I hope you enjoyed this exploration. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And we will see you on Explorations this week. And please tune in for live stream next Saturday when we talk about the reset liquidators. This is Lucius Aurelian signing off. Everyone, I wish you well wherever you are. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to be exploring one of the quintessential smoking gun pieces of evidence for the Tartaria theory, and that is the mud flood. The mud flood, it is really the smoking gun because there are a lot of variations of the evidence that indicate that some sort of mud flood occurred. Naturally, the mainstream has a variety of interesting responses to this theory, and even though there is a wide variety of evidence, which ranges from images, of course, we know what we can say about images and how they can be altered, yet we also have actual structures that we can look at and examine, and ascertain that something happened to them that indicates that they were mud flooded. Not images, but structures that you can really go and look at today and determine may have been subjected to some sort of forces which involved the land changing, the ground being liquefied, or liquefaction as it's called, and that liquefaction spreading all over the land in many different locations. The intention of this exploration is to examine what caused the mud flood, and then why did it happen. However, we're going to conduct this exploration with a different approach. We are going to intentionally look at what the skeptics say about the mud flood and how they respond to the theory of Tartaria. It's always very interesting and I'll admit somewhat entertaining to do, but I think it's important to consider the views of others, because if you just dismiss the views of others, then oftentimes that's the very antithesis of the true scientific approach. And if you look at these images of the mud flood, these are no doubt the most dramatic images, and of course these are constructed. Yet at the same time, we have many photos and are well aware of many buildings that have very deep foundations that defy simple explanation. You may have seen the Salt Lake Temple in Utah, and you can think of many other buildings that you've seen in the course of your travels that suddenly have these signs of being mud-flooded buildings. We're also going to look at a couple in this exploration. So let's start by examining what the skeptics have to say about the mud flood. Now let's take a look and see what the skeptics have to say about Tartaria and the mud flood, from this article by Brian Dunning. And don't worry, we'll be taking a look at his biography here at the end of the article. Filed under History and Pseudo-History and Natural History. And we know what they mean when they say pseudo, don't we? Yes. Oh, apparently you can subscribe to this on a podcast and listen on Apple and listen on Spotify. Well, it's a written article, so rather than subjecting you to that, I think I'll just read it and we'll examine it. Lovely picture, and you can see why I selected this picture. It's a great picture that depicts a potential mud flood. But let's see what our self described skeptic has to tell us. In recent years, a new alternative world history claim has arisen from the internet, as though the internet's some sort of self-aware entity, and it's a doozy. It revolves around an alleged worldwide cataclysm believed by adherents to have taken place sometime in the 1800s, a disaster that wiped out a worldwide advanced civilization and allowed the nations as we know them today to rise up. The event was a mud flood, in quotations, in which several meters of mud washed in and buried the ground levels of houses and buildings everywhere. Those cities and towns that were partially buried constituted the worldwide advanced civilization called Tartaria, which had free wireless energy and was populated, at least in part, by giants. So he's taking parts of the theory and suggesting that that's what applies to everybody, naturally. It was a civilization reset. Out with the old, in with the new, and that new civilization is us. If this sounds too silly to be worth anyone's time to even listen to, then consider the fact that of all the hundreds of topic suggestions in the Skeptoid key, this is the one that I chose for this week, and I chose it for good reason. So attend. Interesting that he has to convince his own followers to listen, but I understand. It's all about a convincing game, isn't it? Especially when we're talking about skeptics. Let us begin by surveying the evidence put forth for what some adherents call mud flood theory, and this takes us about 12 seconds to do. Brian, you're showing us what a brilliant mind that you have and telling us that you're going to dismiss this in 12 seconds. You're not even going to consider it. So we know that you're based on hard beliefs. Well, let's see what takes 12 seconds to cover the mud flood theory. Find any old-timey black and white photo where people are digging, particularly if there's an old steam shovel or mule teams being employed, and it doesn't even matter what they're digging, you can say they're digging out from the great depth of mud that covered their city. Then find any modern photograph of any old building that has floors below grade, especially if it has basement windows peeking out, or if there's excavation going on next door which has exposed its basement walls or foundations, and say that the building's lower levels were obviously buried by mud. I don't want to sound dismissive, but that is indeed the entirety of the evidence that has motivated these people to discard all of known history and embrace this alternative version. You know what, Brian? You are absolutely right, because all of known history is verified and certified by multiple sources, and none of them have ever gotten anything wrong, have they? Despite the fact that our government was preceded by numerous governments that we're told are corrupt. But that's okay, Brian. I'm with you on this one, okay? I can follow you. As far as the previous civilization being named Tartaria goes, this part is more interesting. As you may or may not know, Tartars was the generic name used by Europeans up until the middle of the 19th century for the people who inhabited the largely unexplored regions of Asia, including what we now know as Manchuria, Siberia, and Central Asia. Many pre-20th century world maps showed these regions labeled simply as Tartary. Actually, you can find many maps that call it Tartaria, but that's all right. We'll ignore that. And as geographical knowledge gradually increased, Manchurian Mongolia became Chinese Tartary, Siberia became Great Tartary, and Central Asia became Independent Tartary. So again, ignore all those maps that say Tartaria on them. Good call there, Brian. These placeholder names quickly dropped out of use as the true place names and nations became known. However, today most people have no idea that such a large part of the world was called Tartary relatively recently, really. And when you watch a YouTube video showing so many old maps boldly labeling Central Eurasia with an unfamiliar name, it can be pretty surprising. In fact, it can be so surprising that it might leave a person open to an astounding explanation for it, such as mud flood theory. Interesting, in all this diatribe, I haven't seen any actual refuting of this. Well, maybe he'll get to it. I hesitate to overuse the term conspiracy theory. Ooh, there he goes. Because it's often misused to refer to anything from UFO stories to urban legends to actual conspiracies. So Brian is admitting that there are actual conspiracies. Well, that's good to know. But this is indeed one. Of course it is, because you disagree with it, so you label it a conspiracy theory. You're following, Brian. Believers claim that this ancient history of Tartaria as an advanced civilization and of the mud flood that destroyed it are covered up by today's world governments. They conspire to keep it a secret and to keep historians teaching a false history, the version you and I know. because of course it can't be false history because it's what you know, Brian, right? I agree. The reason for this is not at all made clear so far as I could find, but nevertheless a conspiracy theory it is. Tartaria and the mud flood is truly a 21st century conspiracy theory in that it exists almost entirely on the internet, if not entirely. That's funny. It doesn't exist on the internet when I go out and I do my explorations in person and the people that I collaborate with face to face, but that's all right. He's making broad sweeping comments and you can't blame him for doing that. While some parts of the narrative go back centuries, and we'll talk about those, the whole thing as a single consolidated claim only goes back to around 2017. Yes, Brian knows exactly where it all started. Of course he does. August of 2016 is when the first videos began to appear on YouTube about the mud flood idea, and we know this because of tools such as Google Trends. Yes, those good old Google Trends. They will tell you everything, won't they? This is a tool that allows you to see the popularity of specific Google search terms over time, because there's no other search engine, right? And there's no other means of acquiring information. And nobody goes to the library in person. No, not at all. When we search for mud flood or mud flood theory or Tartaria, and again, he doesn't acknowledge that that term is actually seen on the maps, but why should he? We learn that the internet was essentially devoid of any interest in these things until about December of 2018. That is completely untrue, but that's okay. You can just say whatever you want to. Ever since then, there has been mounting interest in those subjects among internet users. Now, it is true. It has spread across the internet, but that's the whole point of the internet. And you have to wonder, is this something that was originally intended to be misinformation, but now it's gone too far? We can compare and contrast what happened in the 1970s with all of the alternative research, which a lot of people probably correctly summarize is information that was intentionally released to the public to mislead them. But there was never any sort of hitting the brakes really hard in the 1980s or 1990s. They just sort of let all these alternative research theories sort of die out and disprove them over time or claim that they did, and just some of them they let linger. YouTube is what drives a lot of these pop culture trends on the internet, so we should expect that when we go to YouTube and do a search for videos on those subjects that were posted in that date range, we're probably going to find at least one early influential video. Long-time Skeptoid listeners might remember that this is exactly how we found the original YouTube upload that constituted the case zero for the Finland does not exist conspiracy theory. Interesting. I haven't heard of that one myself, but so be it. Applying the same methodology here, I did find a YouTube user, Philip Drugenin, who had been posting videos about a mud flood since August of 2016. At first, there wasn't much interest in his videos. They had very low viewership, that is, until December 2018, January 2019. And what exactly changed? The same time that Google Trends reported the internet became aware of the subject. Because Google Trends were able to ascertain that. Intriguing. Drugenin had an enormous spike in his downloads right at that time. Which one triggered which? I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. Lots of conspiracy theorists have made mud flood videos, and it makes no difference who was the lucky one to get the early traction. What matters is that this is when the subject first became a thing. Yes, because no one ever did alternative research. No one ever had alternative theories in the history of humanity, right, Brian? Of course not. But taking Drugenin's YouTube channel just as one representative example, the descriptions on his videos and his Facebook postings indicate run-of-the-mill, broad-spectrum conspiracy mongering. Isn't it interesting how he says conspiracy mongering and doesn't say conspiracy theory mongering? Because remember, conspiracies are legitimate. And of course, we have the usual suspects that he alludes to that everyone always tries to assign to anybody who does alternative research, because that's one of the easiest ways to discredit such things and to make sure people are not thinking what they're not supposed to be thinking. Make no mistake, Tartaria and the mud flood does not come from historians or archaeologists or geologists. It comes from the darkest underbelly of internet conspiracy theory culture. Thus, we might be tempted to stop here and say that it's not worth the trouble of a debunking. And in many cases, that would be correct. But here we're seeing an almost unbelievable growth in popularity. Look at any of the videos or search any of the forums where mud flood theory is discussed, and you'll see that a depressing number of people fully embrace it. So here's what it all boils down to. Here's his true thesis. People are not thinking the way they're supposed to be thinking, and he's here to put a stop to it. The number of YouTube videos promoting it as fact continues to rise, and some of them have download counts in the millions. So let this episode, in particular its transcript page with the high Google ranking according to all Skeptoid episode transcript pages, so now we're just talking about numbers and that proves everything. Where have I heard that before? Serve as an alternative destination for those using the internet to seek out more information on Tartaria and the mud flood. Yes, the Skeptoid site seems very legitimate. Now, obviously, it requires little more than awareness of the existence of basements and subbasements to accept many of these photographs without being forced to throw out all of world history and insist upon the existence of an ancient advanced civilization. Watching the YouTube videos, I recognize at least one other photograph as depicting a time when Seattle raised some of its street levels, burying many first floors in the process, in order to reduce the steepness of some of the city's hills. Ah, yes, and these are videos that have been covered quite extensively by other researchers. Why don't we take a break here from Brian's brilliant account here and take a look at some photos of Seattle from the time frame that he's talking about. Let's step back here from the skeptic's perception and let's try to look at things a little bit more objectively. In other words, just looking at things and using our own minds instead of just abiding by what Brian here tells us we're supposed to think. All right, so let's just look at this account of flattening hills to build Seattle, 1905 to 1930. Now, as you look at these images, remember, we are told that this was all something that was done in the following account. Starting in 1897 and continuing through 1930, the hilly topography of central Seattle was radically altered by a series of regrades in what might have been the largest such alteration of urban terrain at the time. Probably it's still the largest such alteration of urban terrain ever. Why let that stop us? The regrading strategy was adopted for one main reason: economics. The idea was that reshaping the land would open up the city to more commerce. The earliest urban planners for the city believed that if the streets were at regular angles and at a level elevation, business would thrive. Interesting. Engineers and workers moved mountains, straightened rivers, leveled hillsides, dug sewers, paved roads, and carved canals as part of making Seattle. As Clarence Bagley wrote in his 1916 History of Seattle, no great city on the American continent has overcome so many natural obstacles encountered in its growth. Seattle, Bagley concluded, was literally one vast reclamation project. You know what? I'm thinking Bagley was being quite honest when he said it was a vast reclamation project. These regrading projects began after the 1889 fire that destroyed much of Seattle's downtown retail district. Of course, it always starts with a fire. After the blaze, city engineer R.H. Thompson initiated an ambitious plan to reinvigorate the city. He convinced the municipal government to level hills, fill tidelands, straighten the Duwamish River, and purchased the Cedar River watershed. Most of these projects were completed between 1890 and 1930, when Seattle matched Bagley's description of a city under near constant construction. Now, when you look at these photos, do these photos really paint the picture of constant construction? Do you really think that something like this kind of excavation project would be possible even today if we devoted the resources of the entire state of Washington, or for that matter, the entire West Coast? Or why stop there? The entire United States of America devoted every single excavator, every single worker it had. Do you think this would be possible to do in this timeline now if this was attempted? And then, for that matter, why don't cities do this now? I mean, if that's all you need to do to increase property value and economics, then just do this kind of work. Look at the cool things that you can do and achieve at this time frame. And Brian Dunning doesn't question this. To him, these photos are solid proof that this unfolded exactly as we're told. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense, and the how is irrelevant. You don't ask questions when you're Brian Dunning. You accept everything as you are told. So what do you think of Brian Dunning's assertion that this was simply a massive earth-moving project in Seattle? Yes, it took him a few decades, but do you really think it's practicable? And one thing I'll say is I don't think Brian Dunning would ever ask you questions. He's going to tell you what to think, and you better think what he tells you to think. It's the word, and it's good because it comes from Brian Dunning. Moving on. Similar earth-moving projects have been undertaken in cities all around the world, particularly in the decades around the turn of the 20th century, when streetcars and automobiles quite suddenly came into wide use and required regrading in areas that were already developed. Yes, like New York City, for example. Manhattan had to do a massive regrading project, didn't they? This is one reason you can go to virtually any large old city and find underground tours and such. You see, it's got a rational explanation. It was all just the regrading. The regrading is how they established the subway system in New York City, right? Given these few facts about urban buildings, there remains no evidence at all that anything like a worldwide mud flood buried cities everywhere. Of course not, Brian, because you said so. I know better than to question you. Now this gets better. Quizzically, interesting word there, many of the photographs I found in the YouTube videos and web forums depict Robert Waldlow. Yeah, we depicted him in an earlier video last week, didn't we? The tallest person in history at 272 centimeters, 8 feet 11, who died in 1940. His identity is never given on these web pages. I recognized him simply because he's easily recognizable and his photos are generally well known. But I couldn't figure out what the conspiracy theorists might thought he had to do with the mud flood. Waldlow was born in 1918 and died quite young, so his photos show him with antique cars, clothing, and street scenes. Recalling that the mud flood is claimed to have happened in the 1800s, my guess is that these photos appear to some undereducated people, because you're not undereducated, no, not at all, to be from about that time period, thus making Waldlow one of the giants who lived in Tartaria. Photos of other people affected with the gigantism are also shown, always old black and white photos. It seems clear that the believers considered photos of Waldlow and others like him to be the Tartarian giants that populated the earth prior to their presumed demise in the mud flood. Now, official statement from this channel: there may have been giants, there may not have been giants. We just don't know. But you're not going to see anything like that in this kind of article. You are going to be told exactly what to think, and you're not going to be asked what you think, because that's not important. Paradoxically, it's this introduction of a maximally implausible story element like giants, because Earth moving in a short amount of time in cities all across the world is not an implausible story. No, that makes perfect sense, right? Like giants, that gives Tartaria and the mud flood its closest thing to an element of legitimacy. This is because stories of giants actually are ancient. And then he goes about to talk about the texts of virtually every culture throughout history regarding giants, and quite accurately so. And we've talked about that on the channel before. To a lesser extent, the whole idea of a great flood that resets civilization is another way believers try to link this particular claim to the classics. I say to a lesser extent because legendary floods like that of Noah were said to truly obliterate everything, while this new alleged mud flood simply dumped a meter or two of mud around buildings and was relatively easily removed by workers shown in old photographs. This raises a few points that are not very persuasively argued, in my opinion. Yes, it is your opinion, at least you're being honest there. For example, why did burying only the ground floors of buildings cause society to lose its advanced technology, like free wireless energy? Why did it kill only all the giants, presumably the only people tall enough to have not been buried by it? Where did all this mud come from, and where did it go? Why was the alleged nation of Tartaria the only one that did not survive? Why did the Tartarian giants live in houses and buildings the same size as ours? Yeah, he's really doing the hand wave, isn't he? If all the world's nations are conspiring to cover this up, why are so many YouTubers and bloggers allowed to freely reveal everything without consequences? You know what? That's actually a great question, and I'll address it right now. Because when you have confusion and when you have uncertainty, people tend to adhere to authority, and they will do as they are told. That is exactly why it's allowed to happen. And it also gives a little bit of legitimacy to it. Besides, why would you be saying that, Brian? I mean, isn't that what your entire skeptoid site is based on, is shooting down these crazed conspiracy theories, as you call them? But then you also call them conspiracy. So which is it? You do know the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory, right? And you do know that only a scientist or a historian is officially certified to tell us what the difference is between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. Okay, I digress. And of course, the perennial question for all such conspiracy theories, oh, there he goes, what exactly are all today's national leaders gaining by covering up this event? But let us not push these questions too hard for fear of collapsing the card house that is Tartaria and the mud flood. Oh, and he even signs it. Great signature there. What's this Brian Dunning character even look like, I wonder? Oh, that's an interesting picture of him. Here we go. Here's what he looks like. Brian Dunning. I'm a science writer and author. So he's not a scientist, he's a science writer, which means journalist. And also the executive director of Skeptoid Media. This whole site is mostly my gig. I have a press page here, and my personal site is here. You can also follow me on Twitter, and all the other social media stuff too. Oh, that sounds like the internet, but I thought the internet was this entity that was generating all these crazy conspiracy theories. Okay, never mind. I live in Bend, Oregon, and can be found sometimes inside my Jeep, but often underneath it. Well, that's an interesting little bio. For the record, I don't bear any ill will towards Mr. Brian Dunning. I just find his approach a little peculiar. He wants to assert in his article that anyone who doesn't think the way he thinks must be undereducated and they must be fools. And you'll see that same approach from anybody who doesn't want to consider any alternative methods of thinking or even theories. There's only one way you're supposed to think, and if you don't think that way, then you're going to be classified a fool or undereducated, as was stated in the article. I'm fully willing to concede that it is possible that what Brian Dunning stated in his article could have happened. I don't think it's very likely. I find it very difficult to believe, or perhaps there's some other option or theory that's in between the mud flood and what he asserts is just a city that was conducting some massive landscaping projects for a couple decades because, they just had nothing better to do and had infinite resources, because that's kind of what you have to accept. But maybe it's something else in between. I would never insult Brian Dunning, and I would certainly never question his education level. I'm sure he would give me the same consideration if he was aware of what theories I assert. I think I recognize Brian Dunning, and this picture looks familiar in some way. He bears a striking resemblance to Dick Jones from the first RoboCop movie. But let's be honest, Ronnie Cox is still with us, and he's doing great, the actor who portrayed Dick Jones. Maybe somebody else? Oh, Patrick McGoogan from The Prisoner. Yes, he bears a very striking resemblance to Patrick McGoogan. The wonderful 1960s TV series The Prisoner, which Patrick McGoogan starred in as the secret agent who was seized by an unknown entity and forced to endure brainwashing experiments as they tried to find out why he resigned. It would never work, though, with Brian Dunning in The Prisoner. For one, he would never resign from a government agency as a secret agent. And two, even if he did find himself in the village to be brainwashed and tortured to find out what he knew, he would probably give in right away because he'd see himself as a deviant and he needed to be cured. Therefore, he would simply submit to all the terrifying procedures that they wanted to do on him, and the show would be over in about 5 minutes. No, let's cut right to the chase here. Brian Dunning is Dr. Zaius, Minister of Science and Chief Defender of the Faith. Yes, those roles are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're mutually inclusive. This is someone who is certified and accredited to tell you exactly what to think. And there is no debating what they think. And you dare not go against what they tell you is the good word. Because if you try to counter any point that they make, you'll find yourself facing a grand tribunal. Mr. Dunning will be leading this tribunal with 2 of his cronies on either side, and they'll give you this kind of image. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. You are not allowed to make any sort of counterpoint, and what he says is the good word. Therefore it is truth, and therefore it cannot be questioned, because he's also a labeled skeptic, much as Dr. Zaius was. And then after you face your tribunal and you're found guilty, you will then have to spend some personal time with him, and he will grant you the grand extolling of all of his great historical knowledge and his understanding of how things truly are, and he will insult you relentlessly. And then you'll be reminded of what your proper place in society is. So leaving Dr. Zaius behind, we have to consider the fact that soil liquefaction is something that really happens. It's very well documented. Naturally, we'll be given a variety of reasons for why it happens, why soil behaves like a liquid. It's due to something in the ground, it's an earthquake, it's a natural process. It only happens in isolated incidences, yet we see many different examples of it, and we see buildings such as this that have been stuck in the ground for a very long time. Of course, we'll be told it's well documented and was merely the result of an earthquake that turned the soil into liquid. There is no other explanation for it. Do not trust your eyes, trust what we're telling you. But how many images do we have to see? How many accounts do we have to read before we start to ask questions? Dr. Zaius will tell us that we're just supposed to think exactly as he's told to think, or as we're told to think, and not ask questions. However, there's just too many examples to where we can't afford to ask questions, because then we're just simply accepting things at face value, which is exactly what Dr. Zaius wants, and I'm not one to go along with Dr. Zaius. We see so many images with so many different buildings that have the clear signs that they've been subjected to traumatic forces. We also see different types of markings on the wall, and we'll be given a variety of reasons. We'll typically be told this is natural erosion, or these are the forces of nature, and not the forces of some sort of mud flood. That's just absurd. Yet, how many different examples do you need to see? How many different accounts do we need to read before we start to see that we simply can't continuously dismiss it, no matter how much we're insulted or how much we're threatened? And that's really where the crux of this research comes from. A building such as this, that really gives you the classic example of a mud flood. And I chose this innocuous building intentionally because it has all the classic signs. And yet you can find mud flood buildings just about everywhere you look. Of course, it'll be dismissed by people like Dr. Zayas as saying that you're simply looking for things that aren't really there. But I ask you, what's your impression when you see this image? When you see this done to a building, do you really think that this is something that was just the result of some sort of excavation that occurred? Or that there's no reason for an explanation on this building for why this looks like this? Are you willing to just let it go, and does it really not matter because there's other more important things in life to pursue? Or is having awareness important, and being willing to ask questions and really seek your own answers and determine your own theories? That's actually the very heart of what being an explorer truly is. It's not being afraid to seek your own answers. And there are many people, led by Dr. Zayas and many others, who don't want you to even seek your own answers. And they will gladly insult you, and they will happily mock you. And let them. Because at the end of the day, when you're able to find your own answers, this is how you're able to truly find out who you really are and come to your own answers. What's the real end game of this alternative research? Well, the end game really comes down to the fact that we need to achieve self-awareness, and we need to find what it is that makes us truly unique. And everyone out there will try to tell us that we're not unique. And in fact, the very science fiction film that I referenced Dr. Zayas from, it even tried to tell us that human beings are not so great and the apes are always better. Although to be fair to the entire series, it did show that the apes had many of the same tendencies to engage in violence and inflicting in self-harm. So what's my theory for how the mud flood happened and why? You might recall an exploration that we did early in the channel concerning Holy Hill in Wisconsin. This is a cathedral that they call a basilica. The terms seem to be interchangeable, but a very large and well-built church that's on a hill in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. It's far outside the outer suburbs of Milwaukee. And yet, when we look closely at this cathedral, this basilica, this church, we see the usual construction cues, the large towers, the beautiful window. We see potentially the ability to project some other form of technology, some other form of sound, or the process that's been brought up a couple times on previous live streams of the channel called cymatics are a subset of modal vibrational phenomena. We don't exactly know what causes them, but it shows in these different patterns. Could this be something to do with sound or some technology we don't understand that was emitted through sound from these once great cathedrals, these churches that we see? And this can cause these patterns. Perhaps another application of this technology is that it caused the actual soil liquefaction on a level we couldn't possibly understand. Consider all the churches that you see. The churches that are on a hill, the churches that are in large cities or in great municipalities. And yet at the same time, churches are not just confined to large cities with their incredible organs, their towers, and their amazing windows, which we speculate could be used to project some form of vibrational frequencies. We see churches in every small town and village. There's even a small town called Arcadia in western Iowa that's never had a population of more than 500 in its entire recorded history since 1880, and yet it has two very large churches, both on hills. Everywhere we look across the land, you'll see that there are churches or buildings that we're told have a religious function, and yet there's many similarities in the layouts, towers and windows and incredible construction. We're told and conditioned to believe that these religious edifices are potentially sanctuaries or places where one could seek a sanctuary. And you'll find it in different forms of fiction, that churches are a place of holy ground, just as other religious edifices in the other faiths across the land are. Yet at the same time, is it possible that all these churches survived because they were meant to? That they were positioned in a location to where they could broadcast the frequency or induce cymatics? That somehow their original purpose of defense for the old civilization was subverted or sabotaged, and they were used to induce the mud flood? That's one very solid theory, and I think the numerous locations of these religious edifices across the land and their unique personal locations, oftentimes on hills or in, how shall you say, commanding positions on the terrain, they could have very easily broadcast these frequencies and caused this breakdown of the soil or this soil liquefaction using some process of cymatics, some process of vibrational frequencies that we don't understand. Even the great Cathedral of Cologne, that thing survived 2 world wars. It seems as though these buildings were meant to last and endure. And it's very difficult to find even an unused church, and granted I'm just talking about the United States here and more recent experiences, that's ever been torn down. If a church is unused, the building remains standing. And of course, what do you have inside every church? You have a very large and impressive organ. It seems as though it's the layout of projecting sound. And this goes for the edifices of other faiths as well. Projecting sound seems to be very important. Now, granted, this is just a theory. It could be wrong. And yet, every time you go around and you see the layout of these religious buildings being similar, with the ability to project sound or in some way influence vibrational frequency, then that really gives a lot of credence to the fact that this was how the mud flood was induced. And why was the mud flood induced? Simple. Because if you have a mud flood, it makes it a lot easier to reset the civilization. It enables you to conceal the greatness of the buildings. It also allows a different civilization to control exactly what's going to be released and what's not going to be shared with the general population. And perhaps it was an initial attempt to destroy the enclaves of the population that did not go along with the reset. But there are many theories. What are your theories? Please let me know what you think in the comments. And yes, I want to know what you think, and yes, it is perfectly okay to disagree with me. Please let me know.
But we can't be sure.
He is. He knew all the time, long before you found your cave. He knew. Defender of the faith, guardian of the terrible secret.